Hey there and welcome back. If you are settling in now, the lamp turned down low, the day at last loosening its hold on you, then you have come to the right place for it. Tonight is one of the cosy ones, an evening made for lying still, for letting the room around you go quiet, and the years fall away from you one by one. It is for anyone who has ever wished to be somewhere simpler than the place they are. Somewhere with a fire in it, and a roof close overhead, and nothing in all the wide dark that needs doing. I would like to take you to a place like that tonight, a long way back and a long way west, to a single house standing alone on the edge of a bog in the west of Ireland, sometime around the year 1820. You do not have to do anything to come with me. You only have to let your breathing lengthen and let the cottage build itself up around you as I speak it into being, and let yourself believe, for a few hours, that you are sitting inside it by the fire, with the night locked safely out. So let the bedroom you are lying in go soft at its edges, and let the walls drift back, and let the darkness beyond your window turn into an older darkness, with the wind coming in off the Atlantic, and a single point of orange light burning steady in the middle of all that black. Because inside that light, an old woman is bending to a fire that has not been let die, all the way down to cold ash, in longer than she can rightly remember, and before the night is out, she means to tell the children at her knee where that fire first came from, and why it can never be allowed to go out. Before we step in across the threshold, let me say a few unhurried words to you, the way you might trade a word at a neighbour's door before you lift the latch. I always like to know where you are listening from tonight, and what the hour has come to where you are, whether it is fully dark with you already, or whether the evening is only beginning to draw down. If you would care to tell me in the comments, I do read them, and I find something companionable in the thought of all of us, scattered as we are across so many different places and so many different hours of the night, settling down at last to the same hearth together. And if these long evenings inside vanished houses are something you would like to find your way back to again, you are welcome to subscribe, and then the next one will come and find you when it is ready, with no need for you to go looking. That is the size of it. No hurry in it, and nothing owed. Only an open door, and a place already kept for you nearer the heat than you would think to ask for. So, picture this. It is the very end of a short winter's day, near the close of the year, in a townland in the west of Ireland that has no name you would know, and needs none. The light has been failing since the middle of the afternoon, the way it does here in December, sliding away grey and reluctant behind a ceiling of low cloud that never quite broke open all day. Now it is nearly gone. The last of it lies along the western edge of the sky in a thin band, the colour of weak tea, and even that is dimming as you watch. The land underneath it is going to shapes and shadows. There are low hills off to the east, brown and bare, their tops lost in the murk. There is a long reach of bog between dark and wet and silent, threaded with the black lines of the turf banks, where men have been cutting fuel all the long bright end of the summer. And there, set down in the lee of a rise where the wind cannot get its full strength at it, with its back turned to the weather and its face turned south toward what warmth the day can offer, is the house we have come all this way to find. You would almost miss it. That is the first thing to understand. It is a low building, long and narrow, and it has grown up out of the ground it stands on so naturally that at first glance you might take it for a part of the hill itself. The walls are made of stone and earth, thick as the length of your forearm and then some, and they are washed over in lime, so that even in this last grey light they hold a kind of pale glow, the way a sheet of paper does in a darkening room. The roof is thatch, rye straw gone, the deep brown gold of an old loaf, pulled down low over the walls like a cap pulled down over a man's brow, with the wind having combed it all one way over the years. There is no upper story. There are 2 openings in the front wall that serve as windows, each one not much bigger than the pages of an open book, and behind their little panes there is the faint red wavering of firelight. And rising from one gable end, leaning a touch with the prevailing wind, there is a thread of smoke, blue-grey turf smoke, climbing straight up in the still cold air and carrying with it that smell, that particular smell of burning peat. But once you have met it, you will know again anywhere on this earth for the rest of your days. Sweet and dark and earthy, and faintly of wood smoke and faintly of something older than wood. The smell of the bog being given slowly back to the sky. Let us go in toward it. The path, if you can call it that, is a worn line of trodden earth running up from the boreen, the narrow rutted lane that connects this house to its neighbours and to the wider world beyond. Underfoot it is soft and giving, half mud, and you can feel the cold of the ground come up through it. On either side there are the low walls of loose stone that divide one man's few fields from the next, every stone of them lifted by hand out of soil that grows stone more readily than it grows anything else, and stacked without mortar into these grey snaking lines that run all over this country like the veins on the back of an old hand. A few cattle stand motionless in the field to your left, dark shapes against a darker ground, breathing out faint clouds. Somewhere off in the dusk a dog has heard you and barks twice, then thinks better of it and falls quiet. The wind moves over everything, not hard tonight, but steady and cold and full of the wet, and it carries the sound of the sea, which is not far off, though you cannot see it. A long breathing rush, rising and falling beyond the last of the fields. And ahead the house waits, low and lit and patient, the smoke standing up off it, the one warm point in a darkening world. Now we come up to the door, and here you must slow yourself and look, because the door of an Irish house of this kind is a thing worth pausing over. It is not one door, but 2, cut across the middle, so that the top half and the bottom half open each on their own. This is the famous half door, and it is no accident and no quaint decoration. The bottom half stays shut through most of the day, and it keeps the hens and the pig and the wandering dog out of the house, and it keeps the smaller children safely in. The top half stands open in all but the foulest weather, and it lets the light in and the smoke out, and it lets the woman of the house lean her folded arms along its edge and pass the time of day with whoever comes up the boreen. Tonight, against the cold, the top half is pulled to as well, but not barred, and as we lift the wooden latch, a peg of ash worn smooth and pale by 60 years of hands, the door swings inward on its leather hinges with a long low complaint, and the warmth and the smoke and the firelight all come out to meet us at once, and we step down, for the floor inside sits a little below the level of the ground, into the single great room that is the heart and the most of this house. Stand still a moment on the threshold and let your eyes find their feet in the dimness, because after the open air it will seem very dark in here and very full. The first thing is the smoke. It hangs in a soft blue layer up under the roof, thick enough that you cannot quite make out the rafters through it, and it stings the eyes for a breath until you grow used to it. And then it becomes simply the air of the place, warm and close and resinous and alive. The second thing is the fire, and the fire is everything here, so let us go to it directly. It burns on the floor itself, on a wide flat hearthstone set into the earth at the gable end, with no grate to lift it, and no surround to hold it but a low curb of stones. It is not a tall leaping blaze. Turf does not burn that way. It burns low and deep and red, a thick glowing bed of it banked up against the back wall, breathing out a heat you can feel on your face from clear across the room, throwing a soft restless light up the whitewashed gable and out across the beaten floor and onto the faces of the people gathered around it, who are turning now unhurried to see who has come in out of the night. Look first at the fire, properly, because everything in this house turns around it and bends toward it the way plants bend toward a window. The fuel is turf, peat, cut in long black sods from the bog we passed on the way in and dried through the summer and stacked in a clamp against the gable outside where the rain runs off it. There is a creel of it now beside the hearth, woven of sally rods, brimming with the dried sods ready to feed the flame, and the woman of the house reaches into it without looking, the way you would reach for something in your own dark, and lays 2 fresh sods onto the red bed, and at once a curl of that blue smoke lifts off them, and the heat answers up. Over the fire, hung from an iron crane that swings out from the wall on a pivot driven into the stone, there is a great black pot on a chain, and the chain has a row of links and a hook, so the pot can be raised or lowered into the heat by a notch at a time. And in the pot something is moving, a heavy bubbling under a lid, sending up its own smell to mix with the turf. The crane is the one piece of worked iron in all the house worth anything, and it came, the man will tell you if you ask him, from his wife's father's house, and before that from a forge 2 valleys over, and it will go to his eldest when the time comes, the way it has come down to him. And the fire itself, this red bed of it, has a secret that you would never guess to look at it, and it is this: it never goes out. Not at night, not in summer when the cooking is small, not in living memory. When the family lies down to sleep, the last thing done in the house after the prayers is the raking of the fire. The woman takes the tongs and draws the glowing turf into a close heap in the centre of the hearth, and then she rakes the grey ash up and over it from all sides, banking it, smothering it down into a low smoulder that will hold its heart of heat right through the dark hours till morning. They call it raking the fire, or smoring it, and there are old words said over it as it is done, a little prayer to keep the house through the night. And in the grey of the morning the woman is the first to rise, and she comes to the hearth in the cold and rakes the ash away again, and there beneath it, faithful, is the live red seed of last night's fire, and she feeds it a wisp of dry straw and a few small sods and breathes on it, and the flame comes up again, and the day begins. The same fire. Always the same fire. A fire that has carried over from one day into the next, unbroken link by link like the chain of the pot, for as long as anyone under this roof has been alive, and longer. To let it die fully out. To come to the hearth one morning and find nothing under the ash but cold would be a loss close to a calamity, a small grief, an ill omen on the house. So it is tended like a living creature, and in a way it is the oldest living thing in the family, older than the grandmother, and that is the story she has promised the children tonight, the story of where this very fire began, and we will come to it before the night is over. Now lift your eyes from the fire and let them travel round the room, slowly the way the firelight travels, and let me show you the house itself, because a house like this is built the way a bird builds, out of what the land around it freely gives. The walls are stone and earth both, and if you set your hand against the inside of them, you will find them dry and faintly warm, thick enough to hold the day's small heat and turn the nights cold. They are not high. A tall man must mind his head near the walls, though the centre of the room is easier. There is no ceiling as you would know one. Look up, past the hanging smoke, and you can make out the bones of the roof, the dark timbers of it, two great curved couples of bog oak meeting at the ridge, oak that was dug black and hard out of the bog where it had lain since before there were any people in this land to dig it, and across these couples run lighter purlins and laths of hazel, and over those is laid the underthatch of scraws, thin sods of grassy earth, and over that the deep coat of straw thatch we saw from outside, roped down against the Atlantic gales with a net of sugar-twisted hay rope, pegged at the eaves with stones. There is no chimney in the built sense, no stack of brick. The smoke simply finds its own way up to a hole left in the thatch near the gable, or seeps out grey through the straw itself, so that on a cold morning the roof of such a house can be seen gently steaming like the flank of a horse. It is a roof that breathes. It keeps the rain out and holds the warmth in and lets the smoke through, and a good thatch, well laid and kept mended, will see out a man's lifetime before it needs the full renewing. The floor under your feet is the bare earth, but do not think of mud. It has been beaten and trodden and swept by generations until it has gone hard and smooth and dark as old leather, swept fresh every day with a besom of heather tied to a stick, and near the hearth, where the heat has dried it through it, rings almost like stone. The room runs the length of the house, and your eye, travelling down it away from the fire, finds it is not quite one room after all. At the far end, beyond a low partition that does not reach the roof, the floor slopes away a little, and the air is different there, ranker and warmer and alive with another kind of breathing, for that lower end is the byre, and the cow lives there, in under the same roof, divided from the family only by that half wall and a few feet of trodden ground. We will go down and see her presently. Nearer to hand, against the long back wall away from the door, stand the few great pieces of furniture this family owns, dark with age and smoke and the polish of hands, and chief among them, set where the firelight can find it and show off what little it holds, is the dresser, and the dresser deserves a look of its own. The dresser is the pride of the house, and in a home that owns almost nothing, it is the one piece that exists partly for show. It is tall, near as tall as the wall will allow, made of deal turned dark, with open shelves above and closed presses below, and across its shelves stands ranged the family's delf, the crockery, plates set up on their edges to face the room rather than lie flat and useless in a stack. There is a row of blue and white plates with a willow pattern on them that came as a wedding gift and have never once held food, and some bowls and a jug or two, and a few cups without saucers and saucers without cups, and a lustre mug, got at a fair, that catches the firelight and gives it back in a little gleam of copper pink. It is not wealth. A merchant in a town would think it nothing. But it is the visible sign that this is a settled house, a house with something put by, a house that has kept its footing, and the woman of it dusts the delf with the corner of her apron more often than the plates can possibly need, and there is a quiet pride in the gesture that needs no words. Beside the dresser there is a meal chest, a great wooden bin with a lid that holds the oats and the few precious pounds of flour, and on top of it a crock of salt kept up off the damp floor, and hanging from the rafters above, well up in the smoke where the air will cure and keep them, are a flitch of bacon and a few hanks of dried herring and bunches of herbs gone brown and brittle, turning slowly in the rising heat. For seats there is a long settle drawn up to the fire on the warm side, a wooden bench with a high back and arms that doubles, when night comes, as a bed, for the back of it lets down on a hinge to make a box that a straw tick can be laid in. There are a few low three-legged stools, shuggan-seated, that can stand level on a floor no other kind of chair could manage, and one good chair with arms, the man's chair, set in the warmest corner of the hearth where the heat is best, and the draught from the door cannot reach, and that corner has a name. It is the corner of honour, and a stranger of standing or an old person or the priest would be put to sit there and nowhere else. Drawn into the chimney corner itself, right in under where the smoke goes up, there is even a kind of bench built of stone and sod against the gable, the hob warm as an oven, and that is where the very old and the very young go, the grandmother and the smallest child, to be nearest of all to the fire. And it is into that corner now that we should turn our attention, because that is where the people of this house have settled themselves for the evening, and it is time you met them. There are 3 generations of them under this roof, as there commonly are. The man of the house is somewhere near 40, though the weather and the work have written more years than that into his face and his hands. He is lean and slow-moving and economical in his speech, sitting now in his own chair with his pipe not yet lit, turning a length of harness over in his fingers, mending it by feel as much as by sight. His wife is a year or 2 younger, a strong, square, capable woman in a red flannel petticoat and a bodice and a kerchief tied over her hair. And she is the engine of the house, never still, moving between the fire and the dresser and the children with that particular unhurried efficiency that comes of doing the same 100 tasks in the same room every day of a life. There are children, 4 of them living, ranged from a boy of 12 down to a girl of 3 who is already half asleep against the warm stone of the hob with her thumb in her mouth. And in the chimney corner, in the place of greatest honour and greatest heat, wrapped in a shawl with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes bright in the firelight, there is the grandmother, the man's mother, who has lived in this townland the length of her life and was born, if you reckon it back, in another century altogether, and who holds in her head, as such old women did, the entire unwritten library of this place, its songs and its prayers and its cures and its dead, and the stories going back and back, that no book anywhere has ever held. These are not their right names, for their right names are gone past finding now 200 years under the grass, and the truth is that this family is a kind of weaving together of many real families, a true picture stitched from the threads of how thousands of such households actually lived in the west of Ireland in these years. But the life is real. Every object I have shown you in this room is real. Every task they will do tonight was truly done, and so let us call them simply the man and the woman and the old woman and the children, and sit in among them, an unseen guest in the corner, and watch the evening of such a house unfold from here to the late hour, when the fire is raked and the latches dropped and the townland sleeps. The first business of the evening, now that the dark has come down and the outdoor work is done, is the eating of the day's main meal, and the woman is already turning to the great pot on the crane, and the smell that lifts when she takes off the lid is the smell that fed this island, the smell of a pot of potatoes newly boiled. She lifts the pot off the hook and carries it, heavy and steaming, to the centre of the floor, and there she tips it, not onto plates, but into a wide, shallow basket woven of peeled rods, a skib set across the knees of 2 of the children, or balanced on the rim of a tub, and the water drains away through the weave and runs off into the floor, and there in the basket steams the supper, a hill of potatoes in their skins, white and floury, and splitting their jackets with the heat. The family draws in around it. There are no forks, and there is no ceremony of plates. Each person takes a potato in the fingers, the men and the older children peeling the skin away with a thumbnail in a single practiced turn, the way you might peel an apple in one ribbon, the smaller ones helped by their mother, and the hot peeled potato is dipped into what stands beside the basket, which tonight is a bowl of buttermilk, thick and faintly sour and cold from the crock, and eaten so, the flurry heat of the potato and the cool sharp milk together, with now and again a pinch from the crock of salt. That is the meal. That is, on most evenings of the year, the meal entire, and it is more than it sounds, for these are not the small waxy potatoes of a modern table, but great floury lumpers grown in the lazy beds out the back, and a working man will eat a weight of them in an evening that would astonish you. And on this diet of potato and milk and buttermilk, the people of this country are, in these years, among the tallest, and the soundest, and the best fed of the labouring poor of all of Europe, though they would laugh to hear it said, eating their potatoes in the firelight, with the wind in the thatch. There is more in the house than potatoes, though it is kept for its day. There is oaten bread, thin hard cakes of it, baked on a griddle, for the mornings and for journeys. There is the flitch of bacon up in the smoke, cut down from in slivers to flavour a pot of cabbage or kale on a Sunday or a holy day. There are the herrings, salted, that a cart brings inland from the coast, hung up to dry and eaten through the winter. There are eggs from the hens when the hens are laying, which in the dark of the year is seldom. There is butter, salted down in a crock, some kept and much of it carried to the market town to be sold, for butter is money, and the family eats sparingly of its own. And there is milk, always milk, from the cow at the lower end of the house, sweet milk and buttermilk, and the thick curds and the whey, for the cow is the centre of the economy of such a house, and her milk in its many forms is the white meat that goes with the potato, and makes of it a thing a body can live and grow and work on. But tonight is an ordinary night, a plain dark Tuesday near the turn of the year, and so it is the potatoes and the buttermilk, eaten without hurry and without waste, every potato finished to the skin, and the skins themselves saved in a pail for the pig, and when the basket is empty, the woman wipes it and stands it back against the wall, and the meal that has fed Ireland is over for another day, and the long, sweet, idle heart of the winter evening can begin. Before it does, let me take you down to the lower end of the room, past the low partition, to meet the other great presence in this house, for you have been hearing her this while without quite noticing, the shift and stamp, and the long contented sigh of a large animal at rest in the dark. The cow stands in the byre end on her bed of rushes and old bracken, a small hardy red beast of the old Irish kind, and the warmth that comes off her body is no small part of what keeps this end of the house from the cold. To us it might seem a strange thing to keep a cow indoors with the family, sharing the one long room. To this family it is the most natural arrangement in the world, and a sign of nothing but sense. She is far too valuable to leave out in the weather. Her warmth is a gift given back to the house, and on a wild night it is no trouble at all to rise and see to her without so much as stepping out of doors. The smell of her, the byre smell of dung and milk and warm hide and crushed rushes, is folded all through the air of the house under the turf smoke, and to the family it is not unpleasant and not even noticed. It is simply the smell of home, of plenty, of a house with a beast in it, and therefore a house that will not go hungry. The man goes down to her now with a wisp of hay and runs his hand along her flank and speaks a word or two to her in the soft sing-song that men use to beasts, and she turns her great head and breathes at him, and is content, and lies down again with a groan into her rushes for the night. There are other creatures sharing the night, By the door, in under the settle, the dog lies curled with his nose under his tail, a lean, rough sheepdog who has done his work on the hill and now wants only the fire, opening one eye as we pass and closing it again. The hens have gone up to roost. In many such houses they roost on a perch set in the rafters over the door, or in a coop built into the thickness of the wall by the hearth, a snug recess with a little wicker gate, and from up in the dark under the thatch comes now and then the small sleepy croodle of a hen settling deeper into her feathers. And out in a lean-to against the gable, too dirty even for this easy-going house to take indoors, there is the pig, the one pig, fattening on the potato skins and the kitchen scraps and the buttermilk that is left over, and that pig is no pet and no part of the family's affection. That pig is money. That pig is the rent. When the autumn comes and the gale day falls and the agent's man rides up the boreen for what is owed on the land, it is the pig, sold or salted, that will more than any other single thing keep the roof over their heads, and so he is spoken of, half in earnest, as the gentleman who pays the rent, and he is fed faithfully and watched closely, and his fate, when it comes, is accepted without sentiment, for that is the bargain, and everyone in the house, from the man down to the 3-year-old, understands it without ever having to be told. Now let me draw your attention to something you have perhaps not thought about, which is the question of light, for the evening is fully dark now outside, and will stay so for 14 hours and more, and yet there is hardly a candle in the house. Consider what that means. We who came after live drowned in light. We touch a wall, and a room floods white, and we have forgotten, almost entirely, what the dark of the year truly is, and what it once cost to push it back even a little. In this house the fire is the light, first and last. That red bed of turf and the flames that lift off the fresh sods throw out enough of a glow to fill the room with a moving amber, that is kind to old faces, and hides the smoke-blackened roof, and gathers everyone, by simple animal instinct, into the bright warm ring of it, and leaves the corners to the shadows. For finer work, for when a woman wants to see her stitches or read the few words she can read, there is the rushlight. You make it through the summer. You gather the soft green rushes from the wet ground. You peel away most of the green skin, leaving one thin rib to hold the pith together. You dry the white pith, and you draw it through melted grease. The skimmings of the bacon pot, mutton, fat, whatever the house can spare, and let it set. And there is your light, a yard of dried rush soaked in fat. You set it slantwise in a little iron pincer stand on the hearth, and you touch it to the fire, and it burns with a small clear flame, working its way slowly down the rush, giving a light to sew by, and it must be moved on through the holder as it burns, and a single rush of a good length will give you the better part of an hour. The tallow candle, the dip, smoky and rank, and made the same way over many layers, is kept for an occasion, for sickness in the night, or the priest at the door, or the wake of the dead. The fine, clean white wax candle is a thing of the chapel and the gentry, and is never seen here at all. So the evening is lived in firelight and rushlight, in a warm brown gloom that our eyes would strain at, and theirs are perfectly easy in, and there is a great gentleness in it, and a great drawing together, and the dark beyond the little windows only makes the lit circle round the hearth the dearer. And in that lit circle the work of the winter evening goes quietly forward, for these are not idle people, and the dark hours are not wasted hours. They are simply the hours when the work moves indoors and eases its pace and turns sociable. Watch the woman first. When the meal is cleared, she does not sit empty-handed. Almost no woman of this country in these years is ever seen to sit with her hands at rest in the evening. and the proof of it stands in the corner. Spinning wheel. The great wheel for wool turned by hand, or the smaller treadle wheel for flax worked by the foot, and to it she goes. There is a basket of wool beside it, washed and combed and carded into soft grey rolls, the wool off their own few sheep that summer, and she sets a roll to the spindle and starts the wheel and draws the thread out long and even between her finger and thumb with a motion so practised that she can do it half in the dark and keep up a conversation the entire time and never once look down. The wheel turns with a low steady whir that becomes, after a while, simply another voice in the room, like the fire and the wind and the cow, and the grey thread winds on, and out of these evenings, spun, and then woven on a neighbour's loom and then sewn, comes the very cloth on every back in this house, the frieze coats and the flannel petticoats and the blankets on the beds. The older girl sits near her and knits, her needles going with a small clicking, turning out a stocking. The youngest is asleep now in earnest against the warm stone, and the man, when the harness is mended, takes up the other great evening task of his kind, the making of the shugan, the twisting of hay or straw into a long strong rope, one of the children turning the little wooden crank of the twister while he feeds the straw, and the rope grows and is coiled, for there is no end of uses for it. The binding down of the thatch, the seating of stools, the very mattresses they will sleep on tonight, all of it, this homemade rope, made of nothing, made of the grass off their own ground, made by hand by firelight on 100 winter evenings. It is into the middle of such an evening, the wheel whirring and the needles clicking and the rope growing and the fire breathing, that the first knock comes, or rather not a knock at all, for there is no knocking at a door like this. There is the sound of the latch lifted from outside, and the lower half of the door swinging in, and a man's voice out of the dark saying the old greeting, "God save all here," and the answer coming back from half the room at once, "God save you kindly," and a neighbour stepping down over the threshold and pulling the door to behind him against the cold. He is the man from the next house down the boreen, come, as he comes most nights of the winter, to sit a while at his neighbour's fire, and this casual nightly drifting in of neighbours to one another's hearths, is one of the oldest and dearest institutions of the life of the Irish countryside, and it has a name. They call it the rambling, or the quaird, the visit, or going on quaird, or simply going rambling of a night, and the house that is the favoured gathering place, the one with the good fire and the good welcome and the scene chai or the musician in it, is the rambling house of the townland, and on a winter's night it can fill to bursting. There is no invitation given, and none needed. A man does not call ahead and is never turned away. He lifts the latch and gives the greeting, and is found a stool or a share of the settle, or a seat on an upturned creel, and the woman of the house, without a word said, swings the kettle over the fire, and the night's company has begun. And so the house fills by ones and twos as the evening deepens. Another man comes older, and then a young fellow of 19 with a fiddle wrapped in a cloth under his arm, and then 2 women from along the road who settle near the wife and take up knitting of their own as naturally as if they had never left their own hearths, and a couple of half-grown boys who hunker down at the edge of the firelight where they can listen and be overlooked. The room that seemed full with the family alone now holds a dozen souls and more, and yet there is no crowding to it and no strain. People fold themselves into the warm dimness and find a place, and are quiet or speak as the night moves them. The man of the house takes down his pipe at last, and the older neighbour his, and there is the small ceremony of the tobacco, the cutting and the rubbing of it between the palms, and the lighting of it with a coal lifted from the fire in the tongs and held to the bowl, and the blue tobacco smoke joins the blue turf smoke up under the roof, and the talk begins to move around the circle, low and easy and unhurried, the way talk moves among people who have all the time in the world and have known one another since before they could walk. What do they talk of, these people, at their neighbour's fire in the dark of the year? They talk of everything and of nothing, of the price butter made at the last market, and whether the spring will be early, of a cow that took sick over the hill, and whether it was the natural way of it or something less natural, of a marriage being talked of between two families, and what land might come with it, of who is failing and who is mending, and who was seen at the chapel, and who was not, of a fair away off and the wonders sold at it, of news brought inland from the coast or down from Dublin by some traveller, news weeks old by the time it reaches here and none the less marvelled at for that. There is no newspaper in this house, and not one person in 5 in the townland could read it if there were. The news of the world comes here as it has always come, by word of mouth carried from hearth to hearth, and a man who has been to the town and back is a man with a cargo of talk to unload, and he unloads it slowly, savouring it, and is listened to with the close attention these things deserve. And woven all through the ordinary talk, never far below the surface, there is the older matter, the half-belief and the law, the talk of the good people and the fairy forts and the things that should not be done and the nights that should not be travelled, and it is spoken of here not as children's tales but in the careful sidelong way of people who do not quite believe and do not quite dare not to, and we will come to that, for it has its own deep place in the life of this fire. But first the talk gathers itself, as it always does on the best of these nights, toward the one figure in the corner who has been quiet through all of it, the grandmother in the place of honour with her hands folded, and her bright old eyes going from face to face, and the young people begin to angle the conversation toward her, and at last one of them asks her outright for a story, for she is the scene-chai of this house, the keeper and teller of the old tales, and that is a role as real and as honoured in this society as any office in the great world outside. Understand what such a person was. In a world with almost no books and almost no reading, the memory of the old people was the only library there was, and certain of them, gifted with the memory and the tongue for it, became the carriers of an entire culture, holding in their heads hundreds of tales, some of them an hour or two in the telling, word perfect, learned at the knee of some old teller now 50 years dead, who had it in turn from the old people of his own youth, so that the words coming out of this old woman's mouth by this fire tonight may be, very nearly unchanged, the words that were said by such a fire 1,000 years ago, and more. She does not begin at once. She lets herself be asked, and asked again, and she protests a little that her memory is going, and her voice is not what it was, all of it part of the ritual, and the room settles and hushes, the wheel stilled now, the children drawn in close around her feet, the firelight on every face turned toward her, and then she begins in the old formula that opens such a tale, that there was long ago, in the old times, and the room goes with her out of itself and into the story. The tale she tells is one of the old hero tales, for those are the grandest of her store, and the ones the young men love best, the deeds of Fionn and his band of warriors, the Fianna, who hunted the green hills of Ireland in the days before saints or kings as we know them, and of Fionn's son Oisin, and the salmon of knowledge, and the giant causeway, and the wild boar of the mountain, and the many wonders and combats and enchantments through which such a tale unwinds. She tells it in a manner all its own, half-spoken and half-chanted, the prose running on plain and homely and then rising, at the heights of the story into long ornate runs of words strung together like beads, The names of the hero's weapons and the speed of his running and the fury of the sea, runs that she rolls off without a pause or a stumble, the same runs every time, polished by 10,000 tellings until they shine, and the room leans into these passages, and a sigh goes round at the end of a good one. The children's eyes are enormous. The grown men, who have heard this very tale from this very woman a score of times and could near enough tell it themselves, listen as though they had never heard it, for it is not the surprise of the story they have come for, but the rightness of it, the deep pleasure of the known tale told well, the words falling into their appointed places, one after another like the links of the pot chain, like the days of the unbroken fire. And when she comes to the end, to the close formula that seals the tale, she lets a silence sit, and then someone stirs the fire, and a long breath goes round the circle, and somebody says it was well told, which it was, and a spell loosens, and the wheel starts again, and the talk comes back, changed and quieted by where it has been. Not all that she carries is so grand, and as the night goes on and the younger children are nodding, she turns to the nearer stranger lore, the matter of the good people, and here the temper of the room changes and grows careful. For these people live, every day of their lives, alongside an unseen population, the fairies, the scythe, who are never called by that blunter name if it can be helped, but spoken of softly and respectfully, as the good people, the gentry, the others, them that's in it. For to name a thing too plainly is to call its notice, and their notice is not always kind. The old woman does not tell fairy stories the way a stranger might think. She states facts, or what are held as facts. There is a fort out on the rise beyond the bog, a ring of old earthen bank with white thorn growing on it, and no man of this townland would put a spade to that bank, or cut that thorn or graze a beast inside the ring after dark, for it is theirs, and ill comes to those who meddle with what is theirs. And she can tell you of a man 2 parishes over, who ploughed through a fairy path between 2 such forts, and never had luck after. His butter would not come, and his children sickened until he gave it back to grass. There are things you do not do. You do not throw out dirty water at night without a word of warning to whoever might be passing unseen. You do not bring in the whitethorn blossom. You leave the hearth swept and a little water in the pail at bedtime, for they may want to come in to the warmth when the house is sleeping, and a tidy hearth keeps them friendly. It is a careful etiquette of the unseen, half dread and half courtesy, and it sits in these people with no trouble at all alongside the deep Christian faith we will come to. The priest's God in the sky, and the good people in the fort, the 2 of them held together in the one mind without any sense of contradiction, because the world of this fireside is a world still thick with presence, where the dark beyond the half-door is not empty but crowded, and the line between the living and the dead and the never quite living is thin and must be respectfully kept. And in among the dread there is comfort too, for the same law that fills the dark with the good people fills it also with protection and with cure. There is the holy well a mile off where the water heals, with its rounds to be walked and its rag tied to the bush above it for every wish and each ache. There are the charms and the herb cures the old woman herself half keeps, the knowledge of what leaf is good for a burn and what for a flux and what words are said over a sprain. There is the banshee, the woman of the fairy who is heard keening in the night about certain old families when a death is coming, and the old woman has heard her. She will tell you, the night before her own man died, a crying out on the wind that was no living woman, and the room goes still at that, for they do not doubt it. And over and threaded through all of it, the master of the dark and the keeper of the soul, Against all the things that move in it, there is the faith of the chapel. And as the night comes toward its close, that faith will gather the house to its knees on the cold floor. But that is for later, and for now the fiddle is being unwrapped from its cloth. For no good rambling night is all talk and tales, and the young fellow in the corner has been asked to play. He tunes it for a moment, the bow whispering across the strings, his head bent to listen, and then he finds the pitch and lifts his head, and away he goes into a reel, and the feeling of the room turns over in an instant from the hush of the story to something bright and quick and rhythmic. The bow driving, his foot tapping the earth floor in time, and the older people begin to beat the rhythm out, a hand on a knee, a heel on the ground, and one of the women lilts along with it under her breath, putting the meaningless dancing syllables to the tune, the diddle-I-diddle that carries a melody when no instrument is to hand and is itself an art, mouth music, the voice-made fiddle. The fiddle is the king of instruments in a house like this, light to carry from house to house, loud enough to fill a room and set feet going, and a young man who can play is welcome at every fire in the parish and at each wedding and gathering, and is forgiven a good deal on the strength of it. He plays a reel and then a jig, and the music is the music of this country, these very tunes, handed down fiddler to fiddler, exactly as the tales are handed down, teller to teller, by ear, by heart, never a note of it written, each player adding his own small turns and graces, so that the tune is always itself, and never quite the same twice. And then, because there is a clear stretch of swept floor by the hearth and young blood in the room, there is dancing. It does not take much. A nod from the fiddler, a girl pulled up by the hand, half unwilling and laughing, a young man set opposite her, and the two of them dance. Not the swaying couple dancing of a later age, but the older step dancing, the body held straight and still from the waist up, and all the work and all the brilliance in the feet, the quick, precise battering of the steps on the earth floor in perfect time to the reel, and the room claps the rhythm and calls out, and a second couple rises, and for a few minutes the dark old smoky room is full of music and stamping feet and bright faces and the firelight jumping, and the cow shifts in her byre at the noise of it, and the dog lifts his head. This is courting too, though no one would say so. The rambling house of a winter is one of the few places the young people of scattered farms can meet under the easy eye of their elders, and a great many matches that will be made in earnest later, with land and dowry counted out between the fathers, have their first quiet beginning in a glance across a fire on a night like this, a girl noticing how a boy dances, a boy carrying a girl's memory home with him down the dark boreen. But the dancing is brief, for the floor is small, and the night is for the fireside, and soon the dancers drop back laughing to their places, and the fiddler, reading the room, lets the bright tunes go and slides, without seeming to decide it, into something slower, for the last of the music is always the slow music, the airs and the songs, and now the bright reels are spent the room asks for a song, and one of the women, after the proper protesting, gives them one. She sings unaccompanied, the fiddle laid quiet across the young man's knee, in the old style of this country, a high, free, ornamented singing with no beat marked, the voice bending and turning around the long notes, every singer shaping the song their own way. And the song is a song of love or of loss or of exile, of a girl whose sailor will not come back, of a young man pressed away to be a soldier, of the beauty of a place and the ache of leaving it, and she sings it with her eyes half shut and one hand sometimes held by one of the company, as is the custom, to lend her the courage and to share the feeling of it. And the room that was loud a moment ago is silent now down to the breath, the children gone quiet, the old woman's lips moving with the words she has known for 70 years, and the fire settling, and the wind going on outside in the thatch, and the song filling the warm, dark room, and then ending, and a long stillness after it, for a song well sung in such a place is not entertainment. It is something nearer to prayer, and it leaves the room hushed and softened and ready, as the night tilts now past its height and toward its close, to be gathered in for sleep. While the room rests in the quiet after the song, let me step a little outside this one evening and show you the shape of the year that holds it. For an evening like this one is a single bead on a string that runs right round the turning seasons, and each season has its own work and its own face at this fire. It is deep winter now, the dead time, when the land asks nothing and gives nothing, and the people draw indoors to the long nights of talk and tale and spinning that we are sitting in the middle of. But push the year forward and watch the fire's company thin and the work move outdoors. In the very early spring, about the feast of St. Bridget at the start of February, which is the first hinge of the year and half a Christian feast and half something far older, the woman of the house will make the little rush crosses of the saint and set one in the thatch over the door for the protection of the house and the beasts, and the lengthening of the light will be noticed and remarked, and the first work will begin. Then comes the turning of the ground, the heaviest labour of the man's year, the making of the lazy beds for the potatoes, and here you must put out of your mind any picture of a plough, for on ground like this, stony and wet and steep, and divided into holdings too small and too poor for a horse and plough to be worth the keeping, the work is done by the spade, by the long narrow Irish spade they call the loy, and a skilled man with a loy can turn and ridge and drain a field by hand in a way no plough could better, raising the long rounded beds with the trench dug out between them for drainage, and the sods turned in over a dressing of seaweed carried up from the shore, or dung carried out from the byre, and into these beds the seed potatoes go in the spring, and it is on the yield of them, come the autumn, that the whole of the next year's eating depends. Then the green time, the growing summer, when the beds are earthed up, and the cattle are out on the high rough grazing, and the house empties of its daytime life entirely, and the two festivals of the warm half of the year come round, May Day at the start of the summer, Beltane, when the cattle were once driven between two fires for their cleansing and protection, and when the dew of the May morning is gathered for its virtue, and when no coal of fire and no drop of milk will be given out of the house. For to give away fire or milk on May morning is to give away the luck of the year, and high summer's Lugnasa, the start of the harvest, when the people climb to the tops of certain hills to gather the first bilberries and the first new potatoes, are dug with a kind of relief, for the hungry weeks of late summer, when the old crop is eaten out and the new not yet ready, are the lean time, the only true want in the year, and the first flowery new potato off the bed is a small deliverance. And then the harvest proper, the cutting of the little crop of oats with the hook, the saving of it, the digging out of the potato crop, and the pitting of it in the long clamps that must see the family through to the next summer, the killing time when the pig meets his bargain and is salted down, and at the back end of it all the great turning point of the country year, the feast at the start of November that the old people called Samain, and the chapel calls the Eve of All Hallows, the night the year dies, when the harvest must all be in, and the dead come close to the living, and the door between the worlds stands ajar, and the people light their fires and play their games of nuts and apples and tell, by this very hearth, the year's most fearful stories, with one ear always on the dark outside. Enough. And then the wheel of the year comes round again to where we are sitting, to the deep cold heart of the winter, with the harvest pitted, and the beast in the byre, and the turf in the clamp, and the nights at their longest, And the people gathered in by the everlasting fire to wait the dark months out, and laid into the very darkest part of it, as a light set down in the longest night. There is the greatest feast of all to these Christian people, the Christmas, and I would not have you leave this house without seeing how they keep it. It is not the loud and laden Christmas of a later world. It is quiet, and it is holy, and it is mostly of the hearth and the chapel. On Christmas Eve the woman sets a single tall candle in the window, the one indulgence of fine candle in the year, and lights it after dark, and every house across the townland does the same, so that the scattered lights come out one by one across the black country, each one a sign that here is a house that would have made room, a light to guide the Holy Family or any poor traveller of the night to a welcome, and the youngest child is given the lighting of it for luck. The fire is built up high, the house is cleaned and whitewashed fresh for it. There may be meat, a rare thing, and a better white loaf, and the family walks the dark miles to the chapel for the first mass of the morning, with the frost hard on the boreen and the breath smoking and the candles burning in every window they pass. And then the long quiet of the rest of the winter closes over again, evening after evening, exactly like this one, until the light comes back and brigade's crosses go up in the thatch and the wheel turns on. I have called the cow the centre of this household's economy, and so she is. But let me give you the cattle their full due, for the love and the lore of cattle runs in the very marrow of this people, and reaches back past all record into the oldest days of the island, when a man's whole wealth and standing were counted in the cows he owned, and the great tales told of nothing so much as the raiding of one kingdom's herd by another. That old reverence lives yet. The cow is not livestock here in the cold way a later farming would mean it. She is near to a member of the household, known by name and by temper, talked to, fretted over, her carving the anxious event of the year, her milk the white river that the family's whole eating flows from. In the warm half of the year, when the low ground is needed for the crops and the hay, the cattle are sent up to the rough grazing of the hills and the mountain commonage that the townland shares, and in the older way some of the young people went up with them and lived out the summer in rough huts on the high pastures, minding the herd and making the butter up there in the sweet mountain air, a season of freedom and courtship and song away from the houses below, the bullying, a custom dying now but not long dead. And the lore of cattle is endless, the cures for their ailments, half herb and half charm, the dread of the ill-wishing that could steal a cow's milk or its profit, the butter that would not come, laid to the evil eye of a covetous neighbour or the meddling of the good people, and the counter charms against it, the care on May morning that no spark of fire and no drop of milk leave the house, lest the year's luck of the dairy go with them. To lose the cow, to have her die or be seized for debt, is the nightmare at the back of every such household's mind, the one blow that could tip a managing family into real want, and so she is tended and guarded and valued above any other possession, the warm-breathing heart of the house at its lower end, and her presence under the roof tonight, behind the family as they sleep, is the surest sign there is that this is a house with its feet under it, and its future, for now, secure. The potato is the daily bread of this house, but it is not the only thing cooked at this fire, and the cooking itself, done all of it on the open hearth with never an oven in the built sense, is a skill worth your noticing. The great pot on the crane boils the potatoes and the cabbage, and the pigs feed, but for the baking there is the bastable, the three-legged iron pot oven with the close lid, the heart of the hearth cookery, and into it the woman puts her dough, the oaten cake, or, for a feast, the cake of wheaten bread or the soda bread, when the soda comes to be had, and she sets the bastable down into the raked-out hot embers, and then with the tongs lifts glowing coals up onto the flat lid as well, so that the heat comes at the bread from above and below at once, and it bakes as fairly as in any oven. The woman judging the heat and the time by a long practice that needs no clock and no thermometer, only the hand held to the iron and the nose and the eye. There is the griddle too, the flat iron plate hung over the fire, for the thinner cakes and the oaten fowls baked hard and dry to keep. And there is all the rest of the hearthcraft, the toasting and the boiling and the patient stewing, the management of the one fire for the many tasks, the swinging of the crane and the raising and lowering of the pot by its notched chain to govern the heat, the burying of food to cook gently in the ashes, for the open fire that seems so simple is in skilled hands a whole instrument, and the woman of the house plays it all day long with an ease that hides how much there is to know, and feeds her family well off it, a year in and year out, with no more apparatus than a pot, a pan, a griddle, and the living fire that is never let go out. Since these people live so utterly at the mercy of the weather, with their fuel to be dried and their hay to be saved and their turf to be won all in the teeth of an Atlantic sky that can turn in an hour, it is no wonder that they have become, of necessity, fine readers of it, and the reading of the weather is a lore as deep and as seriously held as any other at this fire. They watch the sky, the shape and colour and speed of the clouds, the red of the morning that warns, and the red of the evening that promises, the ring round the moon that foretells the coming rain, the hard cold clarity that means frost. They watch the sea, the sound of it carrying too clear and too close from too far off, a sure sign of weather on the way, the swell getting up before ever the wind is felt. They watch the smoke from their own chimney, whether it rises clean or beats back down. And above all they watch the beasts and the birds who know before men do, the cattle restless and seeking shelter, the cat washing behind its ear, the swallows flying low, the curlew and the seabird coming inland off the water ahead of a storm, the sheep coming down off the high ground. There are sayings for all of it, rhymes and rules handed down, some of them shrewd and tested and true, and some of them mere old wives' belief, all of them held together, without much sorting of the one from the other. And there is the longer reckoning too, the watching of the signs that foretell not tomorrow's shower, but the whole cast of the coming season, the heavy crop of berries said to mean a hard winter, the behaviour of the beasts at the turning feasts, the day of the week a feast falls on. For a people whose very survival hangs on getting the hay in dry and the turf home before the rains, this watchfulness is not idle. It is a kind of science, the only forecasting they have, and a man with a name for reading the weather right is listened to with respect and consulted before the cutting and the saving, and is seldom as wrong as the proud learning of a later age might expect him to be. Come back now to the fire and to the woman of the house, who has taken up her wheel again, and let me tell you the truth of her days, because the life of such a house turns on the woman fully as much as on the man, and her labour, though it is the quieter and the more hidden of the two, never ceases from the dark of the morning to the end of the night. She is the first up before any of them to wake the fire, and then, before she has eaten a bite herself, she is down at the byre end to the cow. The milking is hers, morning and evening, and the cow's milk is the white wealth of the household, and the woman is the keeper of it, and a deal of her day goes to the handling of it in all its forms. The new milk is set in wide shallow pans of earthenware or wood on the cool floor, and left for the cream to rise, and the cream skimmed off and saved in the crock, and when there is enough of it gathered, the churning, the heaviest of her regular tasks, the dash churn worked up and down, by the hour, until the butter comes, and there is luck and unluck in the churning too, and a neighbour coming in while it is going must take a turn at the dash to show goodwill for a churning that fails, where the butter will not come for all the labour is laid at the door of ill-wishing and the good people, and there are words said over the churn to keep it right. The fresh butter is washed and worked and salted and packed down hard in the firkin, and the better part of it is bound for the market town, for butter keeps and butter sells, and butter is one of the few things this house can turn into the hard coin that the rent and the few bought necessaries demand. What is left to the family is the buttermilk we saw poured over the potatoes, and the skim milk, and the curds, for the sweet butter itself is mostly too dear to eat. And there is a kind of quiet, daily heroism in a woman who makes a fine thing with her hands week on week, and sees the most of it carried away to be sold, and salts down a morsel for the children's bread, and thinks nothing of it, because that is the way of things and always has been. And what of the man and the land that all of this stands on? Walk out with me in your mind into the daylight that this dark evening has shut away, and look at the holding. It is a few acres only, a handful, and they are not even all together. In the older way of holding land that still lingers here, the rundale, a man's share is scattered in strips and patches mixed in among his neighbours across the good ground and the bad, so that all share alike in the fertile spots and the stony ones, an arrangement made for fairness and for the joint working of the land, but a puzzle to the eye of any outsider who likes his fields square and his boundaries plain. On these few poor scattered acres the family grows its potatoes in the lazy beds, and a patch of oats, and a little flax perhaps for the linen, and grazes its one cow and its few sheep on the rough commonage of the hill that all the townland shares, and the land is not theirs. That is the iron fact under the whole of this life, plain and unresented and simply born, the way the weather is born. The land belongs to a landlord, very likely a man they have never seen and never will, who lives in a great house far off, or in England, or in Dublin, and between him and the family there is an agent, and under the agent a middleman perhaps, who has taken a long lease of a wide tract and sublet it in these small parcels at a profit, and the family holds its few acres from one of these, often on no lease at all, but only from year to year, at a rent that must be found, in coin twice a year on the gale days, out of the butter and the pig, and whatever else can be spared or sold. It is a narrow living, with little margin in it and no security under it. And yet, in this year of which I am speaking, it is a living, and a real one. The potato feeds them well, the cow gives her milk, the turf is free out of the bog, the fire never dies, the house is sound, and on a winter's night with the neighbours in, and the fiddle going, and the pot full, a family like this one wants for nothing that it knows the name of, and counts itself, without a trace of irony, well enough off. You have seen the woman of the house at her wheel of an evening, and at her churn and her milking, but to know her is to follow her through a day from the dark before the dawn to the fall of the dusk, for hers is the labour that never has a season of rest, and never quite has an end. She is first up, as I have said, to the fire, raking it alive and setting the kettle and the pot, and then the milking, her hands warm against the cow's flank in the cold byre while the family still sleeps, and then the rousing and the feeding of them, the pot of meal stir about or the potatoes left from the night before, and then the men gone to the field or the bog, her own unbroken round, the carrying of water from the well, every drop the house uses, fetched by hand in pails on a long path, the washing, beaten clean at the stream or the well, the setting of the milk and the skimming of the cream, and on its day The long, heavy labour at the churn, the care of the hens and the feeding of the pig with the scraps and the small potatoes boiled for him in their own pot, the minding of the smallest children underfoot the while, the cooking of the day's main pot for the evening, the spinning and the carding and the knitting and the endless mending fitted into every spare moment, the sweeping of the floor with the heather besom, the whitewashing of the walls before a feast, the gathering and saving of the rushes for the light and the herbs for the pot and the cure. It is reckoned, by those who set themselves to reckon such things, that a woman in a house like this was rarely off her feet from before the light until the rosary called her at last to her knees, and that her work, though it earned no wage, and was never named as work at all, but only as the way of a wife, was the true foundation the household stood on, for a house could weather the loss of much, but a house that lost its woman, lost its centre, and the man of such a house, however able in the field, was a stricken creature, and the neighbours knew it, and a widower with young children was pitied above almost any other soul in the townland, and married again as soon as ever he decently could. A house that grows its own food and lies far from any shop must be of necessity a careful keeper of stores, and the management of the year's provision against the year's needs is one of the quiet arts of this household, the woman its chief practitioner. The potatoes, dug in the autumn, are not kept in the house, but pitted, buried in long clamps in the field under straw and earth that keep out the frost and let the family draw on them through the winter and spring, and the eating of them is rationed by instinct against the calendar, an eye always on the lean weeks of the late summer when the pit is near empty and the new crop not yet ready. The oats are kept in the meal chest by the dresser, the grain or the ground meal, guarded from the damp and the mouse. The butter is salted hard and packed in the firkin, both to sell and to keep a little against the winter when the cow goes dry. The bacon and the herrings hang in the smoke of the rafters, the smoke itself the preservative, curing and keeping the meat through the months. The eggs are set down in some houses in lime water against the dark of the year when the hens stop laying. Salt, bought at the fair and kept dry in its crock up off the floor, is the great preserver, dear and precious, and never wasted. And the herbs and the wild things are gathered and dried in their seasons, hung in the smoke, or laid by, for the pot and for the cure. It is a constant reckoning, this matching of the store to the span it must cover, with no margin for waste and a real penalty for misjudging. And the woman who runs it well, who brings her family through to the new growth with something still in hand, is a manager of no small skill, though no one would ever have thought to call her one, the running of a house being, like so much of what the women did, simply expected, and noticed mainly in its rare and disastrous failures. Look, while we are speaking of how they live, at how they are clothed, for the cloth on every back in this room has its own homemade story. There is nothing bought here, or next to nothing. The wool comes off the family's own sheep. The woman cards it and spins it, as she is spinning now, a weaver in the townland. A man with a loom in his own house works it into the heavy woolen cloth they call frieze, brown or grey, or the dark blue got from a dye plant, hard-wearing and warm and near to waterproof with the natural grease still in it, and a travelling tailor who comes round the houses and lodges with a family for the days it takes him to clothe them, cuts and sews it by this very fire into the man's long coat and breeches and the boy's first suit, sitting cross-legged on the table with his work across his knee and his news of 3 parishes to pay for his keep. The women's wear is the flannel, lighter, in the bright madder red they love for a petticoat, and over it the bodice and the apron and the kerchief, or the hooded cloak of heavy frieze for going out, a fine dark cloak that a woman keeps for years, and is buried in at the end. The linen, the shirts and the shifts comes the same slow way from the flax, pulled and retted and scutched and hackled and spun and woven and bleached on the grass in the sun, the most laborious cloth of all, and kept for what is next, the skin, and on their feet, most of the year, nothing at all. The children go barefoot from the spring to the winter and think nothing of it, their souls gone hard as leather. The grown people too, in the ordinary way of work, carrying their shoes in their hand on the road to chapel, and putting them on at the door to spare them. For there are shoes, a pair of stout brogues for the man, and maybe for the wife, the work of another travelling craftsman, but they are dear, and they are saved, for mass and the fair and the wedding, and a people who would seem poorly shod to a stranger's eye are simply a people who know the worth of a thing made by hand, and do not waste it on mud. And there is one cloth, one suit, one good suit in every press in this townland, the Sunday clothes the best, brought out for mass and feast and funeral, and worn with care and folded away again, and the difference between a man in his working frieze with the bog on it, and the same man on a Sunday morning, washed and shaved and brushed and upright in his good coat with his hat on and his shoes on his feet, is a difference that has to be seen. The dignity that comes up in people when they put on the best they have and walk out among their neighbours as their own equals. For poverty here is not the same as meanness or shame, and a family with hardly a shilling in the house keeps itself, its children, its floor, its delf, and its Sunday coat with a fierce particular pride, and would be far more wounded by the suggestion that they were dirty or low than by any honest account of how little they owned. Now the youngest children are properly asleep, carried one by one to the settle bed and the loft, and the talk by the fire has dropped to the grave register of the late hour, and it has come round, as the late talk often does, to the children's learning, and that is a thing worth your hearing, for these people, who cannot most of them read a word, want learning for their children with a hunger that would shame many a richer place. There is no school here that the state has built or the church has built. There is, instead, the hedge school, and the name tells you most of what you need to know of it. A schoolmaster, a poor scholar himself, a man with Latin and figures and a fine hand and not a penny of his own, sets himself up where he can, in a mud cabin got for the purpose, in a barn, in the master's own kitchen, by a ditch in the summer weather, and the children of the townland come to him with a sod of turf under the arm for the fire, and a few pence or a few eggs or a bit of bacon for his keep, and as they're in the smoke he teaches them, out of whatever battered books can be found, their reading and their writing and their sums, and astonishing amounts of Latin and Greek to the few that show the gift. For the tradition of learning runs deep and old in this country, and was never quite stamped out of it, and a labourer's son taught by such a man in such a cabin might come out with the classics at his command, and the rest of him still barefoot. The master is held in high honour at every fire, this man, and he is welcome on Quaird in any house, and the family of our cottage sends what children it can spare from the work, and the boy of 12 can read a little and write his name and do his figures, and his father, who can do none of these things, looks at him doing them with a pride he could not begin to put into words. And the townland is not quite so self-made as I may have let it seem, for though the family raises its food and cuts its fuel and spins its cloth, there are things that hands alone cannot do at a kitchen fire, and for these there are the craftsmen, the few skilled men whose trades stitch the district together. Chief among them is the smith, and his forge, away at the meeting of the roads, is one of the true centres of the country life, a dark cave of a place loud with the ring of the hammer, and lit red by the heart of the charcoal fire that the great leather bellows breathes into a roaring orange, where the smith, blackened and aproned and mighty in the arm, shoes the few horses, lays the iron rims on the cartwheels, points the spades and the sleens for the turf, mends the crane and the pot hooks, makes the hinges and the latches and the bands and forges, now and then the iron parts of a plough, and the forge is a gathering place, as much as a workshop, men loitering there for the warmth and the news and the watching of the work, so that to this day a great store of the country's talk and lore is said to have been minted at the smith's fire. Then there is the mill, down on the river where the water can be made to turn a wheel, and the miller who grinds the oats into the meal that is the family's bread, taking his share, the multure, in kind for the grinding. And the going to the mill with the sack of oats is one of the small journeys of the year. There is the weaver with his loom, who turns the spun wool and flax into cloth, the cooper who raises the staves of the butter firkin and the churn and the piggin and the noggin, all the wooden vessels of the dairy bound with their hoops, the travelling tailor and the travelling shoemaker we have met, the basket maker who weaves the creels and the skib from the sally rods. None of these is rich, and most of them work a patch of land besides, for no single trade will feed a family here. But among them they supply the few made things the household cannot make, and they are paid in kind as often as in coin. A trade of work for work and food for skill, and they are part of the web, as needed and as known as the priest and the schoolmaster, and as welcome at any fire. Let me take you round the outside of the house for a moment, in the daylight of the mind, to the yard and the haggard, for the cottage does not stand alone, but at the centre of a small clutter of its own making. Hard by the door is the street, as they call the open swept space before the house, beaten earth where the hens scratch and the children play, and the work of the fine days is done. There is the dunghill, the midden, set where it can be got at, and far from being an offence, it is a thing of pride and value, the gathered manure of the byre and the yard that will go out on the lazy beds and feed next year's crop, so that a fine big dunghill before a door is the sign of a thriving house, and was reckoned so without the least embarrassment. There is the clamp of turf against the gable, the year's fuel stacked and roped against the rain. There is the haggard behind the small enclosure where the corn stack and the hay are kept, and the kitchen plot, the few square yards of dug ground where the cabbage and the kale and the onions and a row or two of other green things are grown for the pot. There may be a lean-to for the pig, and a shelter for the ass, and a little roofed recess for the hens, all of it built of the same stone and scraw and thatch as the house, patched and added to as need arose, the buildings huddling together against the weather as the people huddle within them. It is no garden in the ornamental sense. There is not a flower grown for its own sake, not a yard of ground given to mere prettiness, for the margin is too narrow for that, and every rod of earth must earn its keep. And yet there is an order in it, a fitness, each thing in its place and serving its turn, the dunghill and the turf clamp and the haggard and the plot, all parts of one tight economy of getting and keeping and using, the cottage and its little satellites, a single working machine for the resting of a life out of a hard ground, and beautiful in the way that anything is beautiful that is perfectly shaped to its purpose. There is a thing about this fireside that I have let you take for granted, and I should not, and it is the language. The talk you have been hearing all this evening, the greeting at the door, the words of the song, the runs of the old hero tale, the prayers that are coming, are not in English. They are in Irish, in Gaelic, the tongue this island has spoken for longer than it has had a written history. And in this townland, in these years, it is the only tongue most of these people own. English is the language of the market town, of the law, For the agent and the landlord and the few who deal with them, a man may have a stock of it for buying and selling, and have not one word of it at his own hearth. The inner life of these people, their love and their grief and their faith and their immense inheritance of song and story, lives in the older language, and the very richness of what the old woman carries in her head, those polished runs, those hundreds of tales, exists because it is held in a tongue that has been doing exactly this, holding the memory of a people who could not write for 1,000 years and more. It is a language going quietly out, even now pressed back year by year as English creeps in with the schooling and the trade and the sense, dawning hard on these parents that a child with English will get on in the world, and a child with only Irish will not. And there is a sorrow in that turning that the people themselves feel without quite naming, the sense of a door slowly closing on a room full of treasure. But tonight, at this fire, the door still stands open, and every word said in this house is said in the language that made it, and held in that same language is the faith, which is the deepest root of the life of this house, deeper than the land, deeper than the law, the thread that runs through every day and is wound tightest of all around the two ends of life, the cradle and the grave. These are Catholic people, in a country where to be Catholic has, within living memory, within the old woman's own girlhood, been to live under laws designed to grind the faith out of them, laws against their priests and their schools and their owning of land and their bearing of arms, the penal laws now in these years easing and falling away but not forgotten, remembered in the very landscape, in the mass rock out on the hill where, in the bad times, the people gathered in secret with a watcher posted to hear a hunted priest say mass in the open air. That is gone now, or nearly. There is a chapel again, a plain barn of a building a few miles off with a thatched roof much like this one, and a priest, a man of the people, often a farmer's son sent to France or Spain to be made a priest in the years when he could not be made one at home, and the people's devotion to him and to the Mass is total and unquestioning and woven through with all that older law besides. The priest comes on his rounds to say the stations, the Mass said in turn in the houses of the townland, and to have the station in your house is an honour and a labour, both. The whitewashing and the cleaning and the feeding of the neighbours after. He comes to the sick and the dying with the last rites that no one here would face the next world without. He christens the newborn within a day or two of the birth, for the dread of a child dying unbaptized is real and sharp. And every single night in this house and in each house across the countryside before the fire is raked and the people lie down, the whole family goes down on its knees on the cold earth floor and says together the rosary, and that is the act that closes each day of these lives, and it is coming now. Step out with me again, in the mind, into the daylight, and let me bring you to the well, for water is life, and the getting of it shapes the day, and the well is one more of the small holy centres of this world. Each house draws its water by hand from a well or a clear spring, often a good walk off, and the carrying of it is a constant labour, the pails or the wooden vessels filled and lugged home, swinging on a yoke across the shoulders or balanced on the hip, so much of it needed, for the drinking and the cooking and the washing and the beasts, that the path to the water is among the most worn paths in the townland, and the woman who walks it many times a day knows each stone of it. The water itself is prized and judged. A house with a sweet, reliable spring is fortunate, and a well that never fails even in the dry of summer is a treasure, and there is an etiquette and a care about the keeping of it clean. And some wells are more than water. The holy well, of which nearly every district has one, is a spring set apart by old devotion, dedicated to a saint, its water held to have virtue against this ailment or that, sore eyes above all. And there on the saint's day the people gather to make the rounds, walking the prescribed circuit sunwise on their bare knees sometimes, saying the set prayers, drinking the water and bathing the hurt in it, and tying a rag or a ribbon to the thorn tree that overhangs it, a strip of cloth for each prayer and each cure sought, so that the old tree above a holy well stands fluttering with the faded offerings of years. It is the pattern, the patron day, and it is half a solemn pilgrimage and half a fair and gathering, with the devotion in the morning, and the dancing, and the trading, and the meeting of friends after, the sacred and the social woven together as they are in everything here, and the water that the family drinks every ordinary day of the year, carrying, at its source, this old charge of the holy that they have never thought to question and never would. If the nights are given to the fire and the rambling, there is one day given over to something else entirely, and that is the Sunday, the still point of the week, and you should see what it is in a house like this. The work that can be set aside is set aside, the heavy labour of the field rests, and the day belongs to the chapel and to the family, and to such ease as these people allow themselves. The great business of it is the Mass, and the going to it is an undertaking, for the chapel is miles off, and in all weathers the people walk it, the family streaming in along the boreens and the roads from every townland, the men in their good frieze and the women in their cloaks, the children scrubbed, the shoes carried in the hand along the muddy way and put on at the chapel door to spare the precious leather. And at the chapel the scattered people of the district come together, as they do nowhere else so fully, the whole congregation pressed into the plain thatched building, or kneeling on the grass outside the door when it overflows, and after the Mass, in the churchyard and along the road home, there is the other half of the Sunday, the meeting and the talking, the news exchanged, the matches forwarded, the bargains begun, the young looking the young over under the eyes of the old, for the chapel gate of a Sunday is the great clearing-house of all the district's affairs. Then home the long walk back grown hungry, to the best dinner of the week if the house can run to one, a bit of meat perhaps, and the afternoon and evening of a rest that is rare enough to be savoured, the men at their pipes and their talk, a visit paid or received, the children let run, and over it all the particular quiet of the one day in 7 when the round of toil is lifted, and a poor people remember that they are something more than the work of their hands. The rosary is the close of the day, and it will come, but the night is not done with its talk yet, for at the late hour the conversation by the fire turns, as it so often does, to the doings of the living, to who is to be matched with whom, for there is a wedding being spoken of 2 townlands over, and the women have all of it to turn through. And the matching, the making of a marriage, is among the weightiest pieces of business these families ever transact. For a marriage here is not the sudden affair of 2 young hearts deciding for themselves that a later world would make of it. It is a treaty between 2 houses, negotiated with care and patience, and the help of a go-between, a matchmaker, an older man trusted by both sides, who carries the offers back and forth. What is weighed is land and stock and standing, the size of the boy's holding against the fortune, the dowry the girl's people can put with her. A sum in money, or a heifer, or so many head of geese and the linen and the bedding she has spun and saved against this very day, and the talks can run for weeks, over many a glass, with much walking of the land and counting of the cattle, until the bargain is struck and the priest is told and the wedding made. It sounds cold set out so, and it is not. Affection is reckoned in too, and no decent father will force a girl to a man she cannot abide, and a couple matched this careful way, with their families woven in behind them, and the land settled, and the expectations plain begins married life on a footing more solid than romance alone has often managed. The wedding itself, when it comes, is the loudest joy this quiet world allows itself, a day and a night of it, the townland fed, and the fiddle going till dawn, and the dancing, and the drink, and the leading home of the bride. And a wedding, like a wake, is one of the few times the careful daily thrift of these lives is thrown open, and everything given away at once in a burst of plenty, because some things are worth more than thrift, and the joining of two houses is one of them. And from weddings the late talk slides the way it does, to the other end of things, to those who have gone, for an old neighbour was buried in the week, and his name comes up and is blessed. And now you must let me tell you how these people meet their dead, because there is nothing in all of their life that shows you more truly who they are. When a person dies in this country, the house does not shut its door and draw its blinds and grieve alone. The house is thrown open, and the townland comes, and there is the wake. The body is washed and laid out in the best the house can show, on a bed or a table, with candles lit around it, and a white sheet, and the hands joined, and a plate of salt set on the breast, and for 2 nights, and the day between, the neighbours come and go without ceasing, by day and through all of the dark, to sit with the dead and the bereaved. And there is keening, the high formal crying out of grief raised over the body by the women, an art in itself, frightening and beautiful, the praises and the loss of the dead poured out in a wailing chant. And there is, alongside the grief, and not in any contradiction to it, food and drink and tobacco given out to all who come, and storytelling, and even games and laughter and courting among the young in the far corners of the wake house. For the wake is not only a mourning, it is the community gathering itself around the fact of a death, and refusing to let the living face it alone, and refusing too to let death have the last word over a people who go on. And then the funeral, the long walk behind the coffin to the graveyard, often an old roofless church on a hill where the people have been laid for 1,000 years, the family among their own dead going back past memory, and the prayers said, and the clay closing over, and the neighbours turning home, and the house that was so full is quiet again, and the empty place at the fire is felt, but the dead are not gone, not really, not here, but they are only across that thin line we spoke of, close by on the nights when the door stands ajar, remembered at this hearth in story and in prayer, woven into the same unbroken weave as the living and the fire and the land, and that is a way of holding death that has a deep peace in it, and these people have it, and we who came after have, for the most part, somewhere along the way, let it go. Since the fire is the soul of this house, it is hedged about, as souls are, with customs and prohibitions that we would call superstition, and they would call only the right way of doing things, and these are worth the gathering, for they show you how much more than fuel the fire was to them. It must never, as you know, be let die, but beyond that it must never be given away carelessly, for to give a coal of your fire out of the house, above all on the May morning when the year's luck is settling, is to give your luck and your profit away with it, and a neighbour who came asking a light on that morning might be suspected of more than neighbourliness. The fire is blessed when it is raked at night, and blessed when it is woken in the morning. The old prayers said over it that name it as something in God's keeping. The hearth is kept swept, and the fire kept bright against shame, for a poor low fire bespeaks a poor shiftless house. Spitting into the fire is checked in children. Certain things are not burned. The way the smoke goes and the way the fire burns are read for signs. A coal that leaps out foretelling a visitor or a letter, the fire that will not draw foretelling weather or worse. And the great fires of the year, the bonfires of the summer feast and the fires of the harvest end, are older still, older than the prayers said over the hearth, fires lit on the hilltops, the country over on the appointed nights for reasons half remembered and half lost, the cattle driven near them for protection, the embers carried home to bless the house fire, the young leaping the flames for luck. It all comes back to the one thing, that fire here is not a convenience, but a presence, near to a living being, the keeper of the house and the sign of its life, to be tended and respected and never, ever taken for granted, and the never-dying flame on this hearth tonight is the daily proof of a reverence older than anyone can name. A townland is not a crowd, but a known caste, every soul in it a character fixed in the common knowledge, and the people of this fire could give you, of any neighbour for miles, not just the name but the breeding, the history, the temper, the standing, the whole story of the family back 2 and 3 generations. And because the surnames are few and shared by half the district, the people are known instead by their by-names, their nicknames, a system of naming far older and far surer than the formal one. A man called by his father's and grandfather's given names, strung before his own, or by the place he lives, or by some trade or trait or long ago happening, so that there are men who have borne all their lives a name got from an ancestor's red hair or a great-grandfather's journey or a joke made before they were born. There are the characters proper too, the ones every district keeps and half treasures, the wit whose sayings are repeated, the great talker, the man with the gift of the tales or the cures or the music, the miser, the man unlucky in everything he sets his hand to, the strong man whose feats are recounted, the simple soul, the natural, who is not mocked but minded, held to be under God's particular eye, and often near to holy in the country mind. All of them are woven into the talk of nights like this, their doings turned over and laughed at and pitied and admired. For in a place where the same few hundred people are the entire society of a lifetime, the study of one another is the chief science and the chief entertainment, both, pursued without much malice and with an endless, patient, affectionate, unsparing attention, so that to live in a townland is to be known utterly and forever for exactly what you are, with all the comfort and all the lack of hiding place that such knowing brings. If that is how a life ends here, let me show you how one begins, for the same fire warms the cradle as the deathbed, and the coming of a child to a house like this is met with its own deep web of custom and care. The birth itself is women's business, attended by the experienced women of the townland and the handy woman, the local midwife, a figure of standing whose skill is the only skill there is, for a doctor is a thing of the town and the gentry, and is rarely sent for and rarely could be paid, and there is danger in it, real danger, to mother and child both, that these people know too well and guard against with everything they have, the prayers and the charms and the holy water and the watchfulness, the mother and the newborn kept close by the fire and not let out. The child got to the chapel for its christening within the day or two, for fear of its slipping away unblessed, and then, christened and safe, the child enters a childhood that is brief and free and hard all at once. There are no toys to speak of, and no nursery, and no notion that childhood is a thing to be protected and prolonged. There is the floor by the fire to crawl on, and the half-door to keep the smallest safe, and the bright, dangerous farmyard world to be loosed into, as soon as the legs are sure. But the children are loved openly and warmly, fussed over by the old and carried about and sung to, and they grow up in a press of brothers and sisters and cousins and neighbours, never alone, never quiet, ranged round this fire of an evening, exactly as they are tonight, soaking up through the skin, long before they could say what it was, the songs and the prayers and the tales and the whole shape of how to be a person of this place. And from the time they can be of use, they are of use, the small ones minding the smaller, herding the geese, gathering sticks and dung for the fire, bringing the cow, scaring the birds off the corn, and a little older, into the real work, the boys to the spade and the bog with their fathers, the girls to the wheel and the churn and the milking with their mothers, so that the learning of the work and the living of the childhood are the one seamless thing. And a child of 10 here is already half a hand, and a child of 15 is grown. And all of this, the birth and the rearing and the matching and the dying, none of it happens in a single house alone, for the deepest truth of this way of living, the thing under the quaid and the wake and the wedding and the everlasting visiting, is that these people do not live as separate households at all, so much as one another's lives, knitted together into the townland, dependent each on each in 100 daily ways that a more solitary world has forgotten. They share the grazing of the hill, they share the bog. In the old Rundale they share the very strips of their fields. And when there is a hard piece of work to be done that is past the strength of one house, the cutting of a man's turf, the saving of his hay before the rain, the digging of his potatoes, the raising of the walls of a new house for a son just married, then the neighbours come, all of them, unpaid and unasked in any formal way, and do it together in a day, the Maythiel, the working party, the men at the labour, and the women feeding them, and the day turned half into a festival with the talk and the rivalry, and the drop of drink at the end. And the man whose work was done knows that his own hands are owed in return to every house that came, and gives them gladly when the call comes. And so the labour goes round the townland like the visiting goes round it of a night, freely, in a great web of mutual debt that is never quite settled and is never meant to be, because the not settling is the bond. And a man here is rich, not in what he has put by, but in the number of houses that would come to him in his need, and by that reckoning the poor family of our cottage, with hardly a coin in the house, is wealthy past counting. Spare a thought too for the dog asleep under the settle, for he is no idle pet but a working partner, and the day on the hill that we have not seen is largely his. When the man goes up to the rough grazing to see to the cattle and the few sheep, it is the dog that does the running and the gathering, a lean, rough, collie kind of dog, never pampered and never much fed, living on scraps and the leavings of the pot, sleeping by the fire and asking nothing, and yet bound to the man and the place by a loyalty that needs no buying. He works the sheep by a word and a whistle, and the long understanding between them casts out wide and brings the scattered beasts down off the mountain, holds them and turns them, does in an hour what would take 3 men a day. He minds the house and gives tongue at a stranger on the boreen long before any human ear has caught a step. He is company on the lonely walks to the far fields and the bog. There are other beasts in their working places, the ass patient under the creels of turf and seaweed, the cat that earns its corner by the war it wages on the mice in the meal chest and the thatch, the very hens turning the scraps into eggs and the pig turning the scraps into rent. The household is a partnership of people and animals, each kind in its station, each earning its keep, and the line between the family and its beasts, so sharp in a later world, is here a soft and a practical one, the cow at the room's end and the dog at the hearth, and all of them, in their way, of the house. You will have noticed the pipes by now, for the tobacco is everywhere in this society, and worth a word of its own. The clay pipe, the do-it-in, short-stemmed and small-bowled, is the constant companion of the men, and of many of the older women too, lit with a coal from the fire and drawn on slowly through the evening's talk, and the tobacco, bought by the ounce at the fair and shredded and rubbed in the palm, is one of the few small luxuries a poor man allows himself and the first comfort he reaches for. A pipe is shared without a thought, passed from mouth to mouth around the fire, and to offer a man a draw of your pipe or a fill for his own is a small act of fellowship, refused only at the cost of seeming surly. Snuff has its takers too, the ground tobacco sniffed from the back of the hand, favoured by some of the old women, offered round in its turn, and the pipe and the tobacco have their place in the great occasions as much as the everyday. At the wake above all, clay pipes ready filled are set out for all who come, and are smoked over the dead as a thing owed to the occasion, the smoke rising like a kind of incense, so that the very pipes became bound up with the marking of a death. It is a modest pleasure, the tobacco, and not a healthful one, as we now know too well, but it is woven through the texture of these evenings, the blue thread of its smoke joining the blue of the turf up under the rafters, the unhurried ritual of the lighting and the drawing, pacing the talk, one more of the modest pleasures by which a hard life is made not merely endurable, but, on a night like this, sweet. You might think from all I have shown you that these people live shut away from the wider world entirely, sealed in their townland by the bog and the dark and the language, and in a sense they do, but only in a sense, for there are threads that run out from this hearth to the ends of the earth, and the strongest and brightest of them is the fair. Some miles off there is a market town, a single long street of slated houses and shops and a chapel and a barrack and the agent's office, and on the appointed days the country pours into it. There is the weekly market for the butter and the eggs and the few fowl, and above all there are the great fairs, the hiring fairs and the beast fairs that fall on the old quarter days, when the roads for miles around fill before dawn with people and cattle, and the town swells to bursting. The man of our house drives his pig there in the autumn, or a calf, and stands in the muck and the roar of it, haggling with the dealers, the bargain sealed at last in the old way with a slap of palm on palm and a luck penny handed back, and his wife sells her firkin of butter and buys, with the hard-won coin, the few things the townland cannot make for itself, the salt, the iron, the tobacco, a length of ribbon, a religious print to pin by the hearth, a clay pipe, perhaps a precious cup for the dresser, and the children, if they are brought, walk wide-eyed through a din and a press, and a wealth of sights they will live on in the telling for a month. The fair is the meeting place of the whole district, the place where news is gathered and matches are forwarded, and the young see and are seen. And it is the hinge on which the closed world of the townland swings open, twice or thrice a year, onto the bigger world beyond, and then closes again. And beyond the fair, beyond the town, there is a still wider world that reaches even into this dark room, for not every child raised at a fire like this will live and die within sight of it. Some go. There is work over the water, in England, in the harvests and the building of the canals and the new manufacturing towns, and young men go for the season and come back with money and a swagger and tales, or sometimes do not come back. And further off, across the ocean that breathes beyond the last fields, there is America, and the going out to it has begun, a trickle in these years that will one day become a flood. The young leaving for a country none of them has seen on the word of a cousin's letter, and the letters come back, carried home and read out by the schoolmaster or the priest to a hushed and weeping kitchen, full of strange wonders and of money sometimes folded inside, the famous American letter. And there is a thing done when a young person leaves for that far country, knowing they will almost surely never be seen again by the people of this house, A gathering on the last night, with tears and song and grief, so near to a wake that they call it by that very name, the American wake. The living mourned as the dead are mourned, because the parting is as final. It is a sorrow, the going, and a hope at the same time, and it sits in these years lightly enough, one young face missing here and there from a fireside. But the thread is cast now between this hearth and that far shore, and it will hold, and down the long reach of it in time, the children of this very room will look back across the water toward a low thatched house on the edge of a bog, and call it that they were born 5,000 miles from it, home. I have spoken of the sea as a sound beyond the fields and a road to America. But for a house set this near the western shore, the sea is nearer than that, and gives more than that, and you should know what it gives before we leave this coast. On the days when the land work allows, the man and the boys go down to the strand with the cart, or the creel-laden ass, and they gather the wrack, the seaweed thrown up by the tides or cut from the rocks at the low water, and they carry it up, dripping and heavy and smelling of the deep, to spread on the lazy beds, for there is no better dressing for the hungry potato ground than the weed of the sea, and a holding with a right to a stretch of shore for its wrack is the richer for it. They gather other things from the rocks besides, the shellfish, the limpets and the periwinkles and the dulse and the carrageen, the edible weeds, food for nothing but the gathering, a welcome change in the lean weeks and a help in any hungry time. Where there is a boat, and there are a few in any coastal townland, light boats of tarred canvas, stretched on a frame of laths that the men can carry on their shoulders down to the water. There is fishing, the mackerel in their season and the herring, and whatever the wild Atlantic will give to men brave enough and poor enough to go out on it in such craft. And a good catch salted down is another wall against the winter. The sea is danger too, and takes its men, and there is hardly a coastal townland without its drowned, mourned without a body to wake, and the sea is weather, the maker of all the wind and rain that the low house is built to withstand. But on a settled day, it is a great wide field of plenty lying open to the poorest, asking only labour and courage, and the family of our cottage, though they are people of the land and not the water, turn to it as one more of the many small sources that, added each to each, make up the narrow sufficiency of their lives. Consider, before we go, how wide the world was to these people, for it is one of the hardest things for us to feel our way back into, we who can be at the far side of the earth in a day, and speak in a moment to anyone anywhere. To the family of this cottage the world was, for almost all practical purposes, what could be reached on foot, and the foot was how nearly everyone travelled nearly everywhere. The roads were poor, rutted and muddy, and often little more than tracks, and the wheeled traffic on them was sparse. The odd cart, the gentry's carriage seen once in a season and stared at, the mail coach on the few great roads a wonder of speed and noise. The family has no horse, only perhaps the ass for the creels, and so they walk, the man to his field and his bog and his fair, the woman to her well and her chapel, the children to the hedge school, the miles of it, mounting up unregarded in a life distances we would think nothing of putting a whole morning to. A journey of 20 miles was a serious expedition, planned and remembered. The market town was the edge of the regularly known world. The county town, glimpsed maybe once or twice in a lifetime, was a marvel. Dublin was a rumour, and London the seat of a power felt in the rent and the law but never seen. News came at the pace of a walking man or a jogging horse, days and weeks old. A letter was an event, read aloud and kept. The great happenings of the age, the wars and the kings and the falling of empires, Reached this fire late and faint and second-hand, matter for an evening's wonder, and then folded away under the nearer and realer news of the townland, the cow and the crop and the coming wedding. It was a world enormous in its distances and tiny in its compass. Bounded by the horizon a man could walk to and back from between the milkings, and within those close bounds these people lived lives as full and as deep as any, proving, if it needs proving, that the size of a life is not the size of the map it is lived on. There is one more sort of person who comes to a door like this, and the way they are met will tell you the last thing you need to know about the heart of the house, and that is the stranger, the traveller, the one with nothing. The roads of this country are walked by a whole shifting population of the poor and the wandering, the beggar going from house to house with a bag and a blessing, the travelling people with their tin work and their horses and their own old ways, the wandering piper or fiddler, the discharged soldier making for home, the poor scholar, the holy pilgrim, the dealing man, all of them depending, night after night, on the open door of the people they pass among, none of whom have much, and yet the door opens. It is a point of honour and of religion both, here, that no one is turned from the door hungry, and no traveller is left to the night without a place by the fire, and a share of whatever is in the pot, and the stranger is given the seat of honour in the corner and fed first, and asked his news after, and may sleep the night in the warm by the raked fire, and go on his way in the morning with a blessing and a bit for the road, and the family that fed him is the richer for it in their own reckoning, for who knows, the old people say, what is met on the road in the shape of a poor man, an angel maybe, or one of the good people, or the Lord himself in disguise come to test the welcome of the house. And beyond all that careful piety there is the plain hard knowledge, in a people who live so close to the edge themselves, that the wheel turns, and the hand that gives today may be the hand that begs tomorrow. And so the bag is filled, and the bowl is poured, and the door is kept open, and a tradition of welcome grows up in these poor houses that the rich of the earth behind their walls and their gates have rarely matched and never bettered. And what, you might begin to wonder, is the hour by now, in all this firelit timelessness? And the answer is that no one in this room knows exactly, nor much cares, for here is another grace we have lost and they still have, which is a life lived almost free of the clock. There is no clock in this house. There is hardly a clock in the townland. Time here is not the ticking thing we are ruled by, chopped into its minutes and its appointments. Time is the turning of the light and the dark, the slow wheel of the seasons, the calendar of the chapel, and the fair and the field. You rise with the light or before it, and you lie down when the work and the talk are done, and the fire wants raking. You reckon the hour of the day if you must, by the sun, by the length of a shadow, by the habits of the beasts, by hunger. You reckon the hour of the night by the stars when they show, and by the burning down of the fire and the rushlight, and by the deep animal sense, sharpened in people who live by it, of how far the dark has run. The seasons you read in the land itself, in the coming of the swallows and the going of them, the first primrose, the turning of the leaf, the rutting of the hill sheep, the lengthening and the shortening of the evenings that we have watched swing round the year. It is, when you stand back and look at it, a far older and far deeper way of living in time than ours, tuned to the actual turning of the actual world rather than to a number on a face, and it has a peace in it that our hurried clock-driven days have bargained away, and you can feel that peace in this room tonight. The absence of any pressure but the natural pressure of the night wearing on, and the body growing heavy, and the talk growing few, and it is into exactly that lengthening quiet that the night is now sinking. A life this hard might be thought to leave no room for play, and yet the opposite is the truth, for a people with little else to spend themselves freely on their amusements, and the same gatherings that we have watched fill the rambling house turn as readily to games and contests and laughter as to tale and song. Of a winter's night at the fire there are the quiet games, the cards above all, for the country people are great hands at the cards and will sit at them for hours by the rushlight, playing for nothing, or for a few pins or a twist of tobacco, the old games with their own names and their own fierce small rivalries. And there are the games of skill and chance with whatever lies to hand, and the riddles and the catches and the tongue twisters set one to another, and the feats of memory and of wit. At the turning feasts the games grow wilder and older, the divinations of Halloween above all, the apples bobbed for in the tub of water, and the nuts set to burn in pairs on the hearth to read a courtship in how they burned, the games that are half play and half a genuine peering into the dark to see what the year would bring. And out of doors, in the long light of the summer evenings, the young men matched themselves at the weight-throwing and the jumping and the wrestling and the hurling, the fast, fierce stick and ball game of the country, played across the fields with more passion than rule, and the whole district dances at the crossroads where the roads are smooth and wide, the fiddler or the piper set up on a wall, and the sets going till the dark. There is drink in it too, and there is no sense hiding it. At the fair and the wedding and the wake and the pattern day, there is the whiskey and there is the poteen. The spirit runs secretly in the hills from the barley, or the potato in defiance of the law and the gauger who hunts the still, and it loosens the tongue and warms the night and oils the bargain, and is, taken with the open hand of these occasions, as much a part of the conviviality as the music, and like all such things it has its dark underside, the quarrels it kindles, the faction fights that could turn a fair green into a battlefield of swinging sticks over old grudges half forgotten, the money it swallowed that a poor house could ill spare. But on an ordinary night at an ordinary fire, it is the cards and the riddles and the talk and the tune that carry the hours, the cheap, inexhaustible amusements of people who have learned, as we are still trying to learn, that the best of company costs nothing but the giving of yourself to it. There is one more thing about this countryside you should carry away with you, and it is the least visible and among the deepest, which is that the land these people live on is not blank ground to them, but a text written over in names, every field and hillock and hollow and bend of the stream and pool and rock of it named, and the names carrying their meanings and their stories, like nuts, carry kernels. The townland itself has a name, and the name means something, the field of something, the height of someone, the ford of the such and such, the little church, the grey rock. And within it the fields have names, and the bog banks, and the wells, and the very stones names in the old language that say what happened there, or who held it, or what it looks like, or what is believed of it. A vast unwritten map, laid over the ground in words and held in the heads of the people, learned by each child as it learns to walk the land. To walk out across this townland with one of these people is to walk through a story. Here is the field where the battle was. Here the fort you do not disturb. Here the rock the giant threw. Here the spot where the man met the funeral of the good people and was lucky to come home. Here the well that cures. Here the path you do not take after dark. The landscape is alive with memory and meaning, and the long doings of the dead, and the people move through it as through the rooms of an ancestral house where every corner has its association. We who came after have mostly lost this. We live in places whose names we never think to ask the meaning of on ground that is to us merely ground. But to the family asleep in this cottage, the land is the largest and oldest book they own, written by everyone who ever lived on it, and they read it each day without knowing they are reading, and they will lie down in it at the last among the names, in the old graveyard whose every plot is known, and become themselves a line in the long text, a name on the land, for the next ones to learn. Listen, though, before the night closes, to what has been rising outside while we talked, for the wind has been getting up this past hour, the way it does on this coast, and it is worth your while to feel what such a house is on such a night, because it is on the wild nights above all that you understand why it is built so low and so thick and so close to the ground. The breeze that was steady when we came in has freshened and backed and is blowing now in long gusts off the Atlantic, and you can hear it find the house and go round it, hunting at the corners, pressing on the door, combing through the thatch with a sound like a held breath, and now and then a real squall of it comes in off the sea and strikes the gable, a blow you can feel through the floor, and the rush-like gutters, and a puff of smoke is driven back down into the room, and the cow stirs at the lower end, and somewhere a loose thing rattles, and the house takes it. That is the marvel of it. The low rounded roof, roped down with its net of sugan and weighted with its stones, gives the wind nothing to catch and tear at. The thick walls, banked with earth, neither feel the cold of it nor heed the push of it. The small deep windows and the one stout door hold. The very lowness of the house, hunched into the lee of its rise with its back to the weather, is the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 years of building in this place, every line of it shaped by the wind it must outlast. And inside, in the red firelight, with the beast breathing and the family near, and the pot warm on the hob, the storm is not a terror, but very nearly a comfort, a thing shut safely out, a wildness that only deepens the warmth of the haven it cannot enter. For there is a happiness peculiar to a snug house in a wild night that these people know to the marrow, the animal joy of being warm and dry and fed and among your own, while the weather rages and can do nothing to you, and it is one of the deepest pleasures their hard life affords, and they take it without a word, drawing a touch closer to the fire, the talk dropping companionably, the children deeper asleep for the roar of it overhead, the man putting another 2 sods on the fire against the cold of the coming night, the wind singing its long note in the thatch, and it is a fitting music for the turning of the evening toward its end, for the night is far gone now, the bright part of it, the music and the dancing and the tale, is behind us. The dark has worn down to the odd low remark, and the longer and longer silences in between, the silences that are themselves a kind of conversation among people, this easy together, and one by one, reading the hour in the fire and the wind and their own heaviness. The neighbours begin to think of their own cold beds and their own raked fires waiting down the dark boreen, and the night's company prepares at last to break. It is done without fuss, the breaking up of the night, the way everything is done here. A man knocks out his pipe against the hearthstone and rises and stretches and says it is time he was making a move, and another agrees that it is getting on, and there is no rush in it and no long leave-taking, only the unhurried gathering of shawls and sticks, the wrapping up against the cold to come, a word to the woman of the house in thanks for the fire and the hospitality, a blessing left on the house, and the house leaving a blessing on them in return. God speed you, mind the road, and the young fiddler ties his fiddle back into its cloth, and the latch is lifted, and the cold of the outer night comes in for a moment around their legs as they go, one after another, out into the wind and the blackness, their voices fading down the boreen, a lantern bobbing perhaps for one of them, and then gone, swallowed into the dark between the houses, each making for his own fire and his own bed across the sleeping townland, and the door is pulled to behind the last of them, and barred now for the night. The wooden bar dropped into its sockets, and the half-door that stood open to the road all the long day is shut at last, and the house is the family's own again. Smaller, suddenly, and stiller, the company gone, only the home people left in the firelight, and the wind outside, and the beast below, and the children sleeping, and the night standing tall around the little lit room. And now comes the act that closes every day of these lives, the still centre that the whole of this evening has been quietly bending toward, and it asks of you only that you be as still to witness it as the room is to do it. The woman damps the wheel and sets her work aside. The man knocks the last ash from his pipe. The wakeful children are roused gently to their knees, and the smallest too far gone in sleep to wake is let lie. And then the family of this house, the father and the mother, the old grandmother and the children, go down together onto their knees on the bare earth floor in the firelight, facing the hearth, or facing a print of the Sacred Heart pinned to the wall with its own small light before it, and they bless themselves. And the man, as the head of the house, gives out the rosary, and the prayers begin. It is not quick, and it is not short. It is the long winding round of the beads, decade after decade, the man leading the first half of each prayer, and the rest of the household answering in the second. The old responses rising and falling in the firelit dark in the language of the country, a sound as old and as worn smooth as the latch and the hearthstone, a sound that is going up at this very hour from every house across this townland, and the next, from each thatched kitchen the length and breadth of this island, a whole people on its knees in the dark at the day's end. And to it are added, after the beads are told, the trimmings, the long litany of particular prayers the family adds on of its own, for the souls of their own dead, named one by one, for the sick of the townland, for a son or a daughter gone over the water, for a safe night and a good death, and holy souls in purgatory, and the intentions of the heart that no one speaks aloud, the prayers going on in the heat of the fire until the smallest waking child is swaying with sleep and the words run together into a drowsy music, and then the last blessing, and the signing of the cross, and it is finished, and the family rises stiffly from the floor, and the day, in the eyes of this house and of its God, is well and rightly ended. But there is one thing yet to be done before the sleeping, one small ceremony left, and it falls to the grandmother, and it is the thing I promised you at the very start of this evening, away back when we first saw the one orange light burning out in all that blackness. For there is a child still awake, a boy of 12, kept up by the wind and the strangeness of a night with company in it, and he is sitting close in by the hob, watching his grandmother, and he asks her the question children of this house have always asked, looking into the red heart of the banked fire. Where did the fire come from, and why must it never go out? And the old woman, who has been waiting all evening for the asking, draws her shawl closer and looks into the embers a long moment and tells him, "This fire," she says, "has been burning longer than I have been alive, and I am old. When I came to this house as a bride, more years ago than you have fingers and toes to count, I did not come empty-handed. Among the things I brought from my mother's house was a fire. On the morning I was married and left the home I was reared in, my own mother went to her hearth, the hearth I had known since before I could walk, the hearth my own grandmother had kept, and she took from it a live coal, a single red seed of her own fire, and she carried it here wrapped and breathing in a pot, 3 miles over the bog, and with it she kindled this hearth in this house on the day I came to it, so that the fire that warmed me as a child would go on warming me as a wife and a mother, unbroken, the same fire. And her mother had done the same for her before that, and her mother before that, back and back beyond any name I know, each daughter carrying the live seed of the home fire out to the new house, so that the fire on this hearth tonight is not a new fire at all, has never once been a new fire, but is the same single flame, passed hand to hand and hearth to hearth down the women of this family for longer than there are stories to tell of it, kept alive every night under the ash, never let to die. And one day, she says, when you are a man with a house of your own and a wife come into it, your own mother will carry a coal of this very fire out to your new hearth, and this flame will burn there, and you will keep it as I have kept it. And when you are as old as I am, you will sit by it and tell your own child's child what I am telling you now, that the fire must never go out, because the fire is the life of the house, and the life of the house is us, all of us, the ones at this hearth tonight, and the ones before us back to the start, and the ones to come after us we will never see, and as long as the fire is kept, none of us is ever fully gone. And the boy looks at the fire he has seen every day of his life, and has never until this moment truly seen, and something in him understands it more than he has words for, and the old woman reaches out with the tongs, and she gathers the glowing turf into a tight mound in the middle of the hearth, the live red coals of it drawn to the centre, and then she takes the ash, the soft grey ash that has fallen all the long evening, and she rakes it up and over the coals from every side, banking it, covering the fire over, smothering the flame down into a deep smoulder that will keep its core of heat all through the dark hours of the wind and the cold until the morning. And as her hands do the work they have done every night of her life, her lips move in the old words said over the raking of the fire, the prayer that lays the fire to its rest and asks a blessing on the house through the night, the same words her mother said, and her mother's mother. And when it is done, the bright hearth is a low dim glow under its grey blanket of ash, the room gone darker for it, and the long day is sealed, and the fire is safe, and the boy is sent at last to his bed understanding, for the first time in his short life, that he is one link in something with no beginning and no end that he can see, and that the keeping of the fire is the keeping of all of it. Now the house makes itself ready for sleep, and there is little enough to it, for the same room that has been kitchen and parlour and workshop and chapel and theatre, all the evening is bedchamber too, and the beds are made where they stand. The settle by the fire where the neighbours sat has its hinged back let down to make a box, and a straw tick is laid in it, and it becomes a bed for two of the children, drawn up in the warm near the banked hearth. There is a bed in the corner behind a half curtain, the good bed, with its frame and its straw mattress and its blankets of the family's own frieze and its precious feather bolster, and that is for the man and his wife. The old grandmother has her place in the warm angle by the chimney, on a low settle bed of her own, nearest the heat, as is her right and her need. And up under the roof, reached by a few pegs driven into the gable, or a short ladder, there is the loft, a half floor laid across the couples over one end of the room, warm with the heat and the smoke that gather up there. And that is where the older children climb to sleep on their ticks of straw, up among the hanging bacon and the herbs and the stored odds and ends, with the thatch a hand's breadth over their faces and the wind walking on the roof. There are no night clothes. People lie down in their shifts, or simply loosen their day clothes and roll into the blankets. There is no washing of faces or brushing of teeth, or any of the small rituals we put between the day and the dark. There is only the lying down, the pulling up of the blanket, the settling of the body into the straw that whispers and shifts under it, and the giving of the self over to sleep, all of it the more easily for the hard work of the day and the heavy peace of the night, and the deep safety of the barred door and the kept fire. One by one they settle. The children in the loft go quiet first, dropping off mid-whisper the way children do. The man sees to the fire one last time and goes down the room in the near dark to the byre end and speaks a word to the cow and finds all well, and bars a shutter and comes back and gets into the corner bed beside his wife, who is already half asleep, her hands at last, after the whole long span of the day, at rest. The grandmother lies a while, with her eyes open in the firelight, as the old do, her bead still in her fingers, thinking her own thoughts, before sleep takes her too. And the boy of 12, up in the loft now with the fire story still turning in him, lies on his back with the thatch close above him, and listens to the wind and the breathing of the house below, the small sounds of his sleeping family, the shift of the cow, the settle of the embers, and feels himself held in the middle of it all, a link in the chain, and is asleep before he knows it. And the room, that was so full of life and music and voices an hour ago, is given over now to the dark and the slow tick of the cooling fire and the night, and there is no one left awake in it at all, and the house sleeps. Let us stay a while in the sleeping house, you and I, the only ones awake in it now, and listen to it breathe, because there is a deep sweetness in a house at rest that you only hear when all the voices have gone down. The fire under its ash gives out no flame now, only a faint red breathing at the centre when a draught finds it, and a tick and a settle now and then as the burnt turf shifts and crumbles into itself. The wind has steadied to a constant streaming over the roof, a sound the sleepers no longer hear because they have heard it every night of their lives, the thatch hardly stirring under it, the stones holding it down. The cow shifts her weight at the lower end, lets out a long sigh and is still. A child murmurs something in the loft and turns over. A timber in the roof creaks as the cold tightens its grip on the night. And under and through all these small sounds there is the immense soft silence of a world before engines, a silence we can scarcely imagine now, no hum of anything anywhere, no light but the stars between the racing clouds and the dim coals on the hearth, and far off the answering coals on 100 other hearths across the dark country, every one of them raked and banked the same way, each house barred and sleeping the same sleep, the smoke standing thin above each thatched roof in the cold, an entire land lying down together in the dark, with its fires kept, and its prayers said, and its dead remembered, and its door shut against the night, and nothing moving on the boreens between, but the wind and the rain. And whatever the old people believe moves there when the houses sleep. And if you let your mind rise up now, gently, the way it does as you drift towards sleep, up off the floor of this one room and out through the smoke hole and the thatch into the cold streaming air above the townland, you would see it all spread below you in the dark, the scattered lights of the banked fires showing faint and red through smoke holes and gable vents here and there across the black land, the bog a deeper blackness between, the low hills, the field walls running their pale grey lines, the chapel black on its rise, the market town a denser cluster of dark roofs far off with maybe one late lit window in it, and beyond all of it, past the last fields, the sea, heaving and breathing and catching the little light there is in long pale lines of broken water under the wind. A whole countryside asleep. A way of living so settled and so deep that it seems, from up here in the dark, less like something people are doing, and more like something the land itself is doing, breathing deep in its sleep, the fires its warm pulse, the people folded into it, as much a part of it as the cattle and the thorn trees and the curlews crying somewhere out over the bog in the dark. And since we are up here in the cold air over the sleeping land, let me hold you here a moment longer and speak of the bog, that black reach we crossed, coming in and have hardly looked at since, because the bog is the keeper of more than turf, and on a night like this, with the house asleep on the edge of it, it is worth the knowing. The fire smouldering on that hearth below us, the very heat that holds the house through the night, is the bog given back. For the turf they burn is no ordinary fuel. It is the bog itself, cut and dried, and the bog is time made solid, the gradual heaping up of dead moss and reed and heather over thousands upon thousands of years, pressed down under its own wet weight into this dark, dense stuff that, dug and dried and set to the flame, gives back in heat and light the sunshine that fell on this place when the first people had barely come to it. When the man cut his turf last spring, slicing the long black sods out of the bank with his sleen and stacking them to dry, he was cutting downward through the years, the top sods young and fibrous, the deep ones below black and heavy as coal, and the deepest of all holding sometimes the great bones of bog oak, the trunks of forests that grew and fell here when this drowned land was dry and wooded, oak gone hard and black as iron in its long burial, the very oak that makes the curved couples of the roof over the sleeping families' heads. So the house is built of the bog, and warmed by the bog, and stands on the edge of the bog, and the bog keeps it all, keeps the wood and the heat and the memory, and would keep, if they fell into it, the people themselves, perfect and unrotted down the centuries, as it has kept others found now and then by the turf cutters, faces from 1,000 years ago looking up unchanged out of the black bank. It is a patient thing, the bog, and a deep one, and the little fire of it on the hearth tonight is a small warm window into an immensity of time, and the people who burn it, without ever framing the thought, live their brief lives warmed by the long death of the ages. Hold that thought of the deep time in the bog, and now turn it the other way, and look not down into the years but back across them, across the lives that have been lived in just this way on just this spot, because this is the thing I have most wanted to show you on this long night, and it is the thing that makes a single ordinary evening in a poor house worth the crossing of 200 years to sit inside. The evening you have spent here tonight, around the year 1820, was not new. Push back 50 years to the days when this old grandmother was the child by the fire, and you would find an evening almost exactly like it. The same hearth, the same banked fire, the same tales told in the same tongue, the same wheel turning, the same prayers on the same cold floor. Push back 50 more into the middle of the 1700s, and back again to the 1600s, into the time of the great upheavals when the old Gaelic order was being broken and the land changing hands over the people's heads and armies marching through the country, and you would still find in a house like this, on a night like this, the fire kept and the story told, and the neighbours rambling in, and the rosary said, the small deep rhythm of the hearth going on underneath the loud disasters of the histories, scarcely touched by them. Push back to 1500, 300 years and more before this night, and the kings and the faiths and the very names of the country's masters have all changed many times over, and the cottage is humbler still and older in its form, but the fire is on the floor, and the smoke is in the thatch, and the cattle are at the lower end, and the old woman is telling the children of Fionn and the Fianna by the light of the burning bog. The same words very nearly, the same fire kept the same way, the same web of neighbours and seasons and prayers, and the dead held close. 300 years more. The mighty of the earth rose and fell and fought their wars, and signed their treaties and were forgotten, and through all of it, under all of it, this This quiet kept thing, this evening, went on, night after night after night, in 10,000 houses across this island, the most enduring fact in all the history of this place, precisely because it was the least regarded, the life of the ordinary fireside, kept alive like the coal under the ash, from one generation to the next, down the long dark reach of the centuries. Now I would not have you carry away from this night a picture too soft to be true, for that would be its own kind of untruth, and this people deserve better of us than to be turned into a pretty story. So let me weigh the life honestly for you, here in the dark while they sleep, the hardness of it, as well as the sweetness, because both are real, and the sweetness is only worth anything if you have seen the hardness it grew in. It was a life of unremitting bodily labour, from the child minding geese to the bent old man still saving his turf, work that wore people out and aged them early. The woman we saw at her wheel likely to be worn grey and stooped at 50. It was a life lived always near the edge, on a few acres held at another man's pleasure, with the hungry weeks of late summer when the old potatoes were eaten and the new not dug, when even a settled house like this one tightened its belt and the children's faces thinned. It was a life with little medicine in it beyond the herb and the charm and the prayer, in which fevers swept the townlands and took the strong as well as the weak, in which a woman bore many children knowing that she would not rear them all, that some small ones would go back into the clay of the hillside graveyard before they could walk, a grief so common it was almost expected, and never for that an ounce the lighter. It was cold, and it was often wet, and it was dark half the year, and it was poor, truly poor, poorer than almost anything in the world we come from, and I will not pretend otherwise to make you feel cosy. And yet, here is the thing that the bare account of the poverty entirely misses, the thing you have felt all this evening sitting in among them in the firelight, which is that within that hard and narrow frame these people had built a life of an extraordinary richness, and they knew it, and they would not, most of them, have changed places with the comfortable of the earth if it had cost them what they had. They had work that made sense, work whose fruits they could see and hold, the turf they cut warming their own hearth, the wool they spun clothing their own backs, the food they raised filling their own children. They had time, the deep unhurried time we have lost, time to tell a tale to its full length and listen to it told, time to sit a winter's night through at a neighbour's fire with nowhere they had to be. They had one another, woven into the townland so close that no joy and no grief was ever born alone, every birth and match and death the business of all. They had a place known to the last stone and field, and well, a place their people had held back past memory, and where their own dust would lie among that of all their dead. They had the tales and the songs and the music, a treasure house of the mind and the spirit that the richest man in London could not have bought. And they had the fire, kept and carried and never let die, and the faith that held the dark at bay, and the deep animal contentment of the snug house on the wild night. It was a poor life and a hard one and a short one by our measure, and it was also by measures we have half forgotten how to take, a full and a rooted and a deeply human life, lived close to the ground and close to each other and close to the turning of the year. And there was in it, on a night like this one, a peace that we, with everything we have, go looking for now and very often cannot find. It is worth asking, before we let the night take us too, what became of all this, and what we who look back at it have lost, and what we have kept. For you and I are the children of people who lived more or less as this family lived. Almost everyone is. Scratch back far enough on any line, and you come to a hearth like this one, and we did not stay there. and it is worth knowing the shape of the trade we made. We gained, and there is no sense pretending we did not. Comforts these people would have wept for joy to have. We gained medicine that lets our children live, nearly all of them past the age that took so many of theirs into the hill. We gained warmth at the turn of a knob and food we need not raise with our own hands, and light that banishes the dark entirely, and an ease of the body that the hardest working among us could scarcely explain to that worn woman at her wheel. We gained, most of us, the freedom to leave the one small place we were born to and become something its boundaries could never have held. These are not small matters. They are what people in every poor place on earth have always longed for, and the family asleep below us would have understood the longing perfectly. But we lost much too quiet and unmeasured, the kind of loss that does not show up in any account of progress. And it is only on a night like this, sitting in the warm dark of a vanished house, that we feel the weight of them. We lost the deep belonging, that being so woven into a place and a people that you were never, your whole life long, truly alone. We lost the unhurried time, and the work that showed its meaning in your own hands, and the tales told to their full length, and the dead kept close, and the sky full of stars over a land with no other light. We lost, most of us, the kept fire, the sense of being one link in a long bright chain reaching back past memory and on past our own ending, the sense the boy of 12 fell asleep with tonight, that as long as the fire is kept, none of us is ever fully gone. And the strange part, the one worth lying awake a moment over, is that with all we have gained we go on, so many of us, restless and seeking and somehow unhoused, looking for exactly what that poor family had in such abundance and never had to look for at all. The thing that is in this room tonight settled over the sleeping like the warmth off the banked coals, and that has no better name than peace. Lift your eyes once more, while they sleep and while you can, to the sky over the cottage, because it is a sky we have lost as surely as we have lost the fireside, and they had it every clear night of their lives. The clouds that ran all evening have torn open now in the small hours, and the wind is dropping, and overhead, between the ragged dark edges of the cloud, the stars are out in a multitude. We who live drowned in light can hardly picture the whole vault of them blazing down on the black silent land, thick as spilled salt, the faint river of the Milky Way washed clear across the middle of it, and a moon low and bright, laying a path of cold silver along the wet bog and the slate of the distant sea. These people knew that sky. They had no other clock and no other calendar of the night, and so they read it as we read a page, the great wheel of it, turning with the hours so that a man waking could tell the night's age by the place of the bright stars. The moon watched, and its phases marked for the cutting of the turf, and the killing of the pig, and the sowing of the seed. The old names known for the brightest of the lights, the whole turning dome of it as familiar to them, and as full of meaning as the faces of their neighbours. And under that blaze of stars the land lay sleeping, the cottage and its kept fire one small warm point in an immensity of dark and cold and silence and turning light, and there was no terror in the smallness of it to them, only the old deep sense, bred into people who live under the open sky, of being a small known thing held in a vast order that was minding its vast business overhead exactly as it had since before there were any fires lit on the earth at all. The night will wear on now toward its turning, the cold hours between the small of the morning and the first grey, and nothing will stir in the house through them but the things that stir of themselves, the settling of the burnt turf, the breathing of the sleepers, the cow easing her weight from one side to the other in the blackness. The wind will fall away to almost nothing before dawn, as it often does, and a stillness will come down over the land, the deepest stillness of the whole turning of the day, the hour when the very old sometimes slip away, and the very new sometimes come, the held breath between the dark and the light. And then, with no clock to mark it, only the gradual greying of the small windows from black to the faintest grey-blue, the morning will come, and the first to feel it, as she has been the first to feel it every morning of her married life, will be the woman of the house. She will wake in the cold gloom before the others by the old habit that needs no waking, and she will rise and wrap herself, and come barefoot across the cold floor to the hearth, and kneel down at it, and she will take the tongs and rake away the grey blanket of ash that has held the fire through the night, gently, from the centre outward, and there, underneath, faithful, exactly as it has been each morning of her life and her mother's life and back beyond telling, she will find it the live red seed of the night's fire, the same flame the old woman told the boy of, glowing patient under the ash, never having died. And she will feed it a twist of dry straw and a few splinters, and lean down and breathe on it, softly the way you breathe on something you love to wake it, and the flame will catch and stand up small and bright in the grey gloom, and the new day will have its fire, the same fire, unbroken, carried over the gulf of the night, as it has been carried over the gulf of the generations, and the house will begin to stir, and the cycle of the day we have watched close will open again exactly as it has opened 10,000 times. The fire first, then the milking, then the potatoes, then the work, then the night, then the fire raked, then the dark crossed, then the fire found again, on and on, the kept flame and the turning day and the turning year and the turning generations, all of it one unbroken burning, tended by hands that pass it each to the next and lie down at last, and are themselves remembered by the fire they kept. But that is the morning, and the morning is not ours tonight. We are not going to wait for it, you and I, because the whole point of this house and this hour, the gift it has to give you, is the rest, the deep-kept rest of it, and it is time you had your share. So let the morning stay where it is, far off at the other end of the night, a sure thing, a promised thing, the fire that will be found under the ash, and let it wait for them. And let us turn now, gently, from the sleeping family, who need us no longer and never knew we were here, and let me bring you slowly back, the way you came, toward your own night and your own rest. Come away from the hearth, then, softly, so as not to wake them back up the length of the unlit room we know so well by now, past the dresser with its delf holding the last red glint of the banked fire, past the settle where the children sleep, past the wheel standing still in the corner, down to the cow shifting warm in her rushes, and to the door. Lift the bar. Let yourself out through the half door one last time into the cold, and pull it gently to behind you, and stand a moment in the lee of the gable in the falling wind with the great wash of stars overhead. The house behind you is dark now, but for the thin thread of smoke standing up off the kept fire, and the faintest red breath at the smoke hole, and it looks again, from out here, exactly as it looked when we first came up the boreen at dusk, a low pale shape hunched into the hill asleep, holding its warmth and its people and its flame safe inside it through the night. Take your last look at it. You will not come this way again, not to this house, not to these people who lived and slept and kept their fire and said their prayers 200 years before you were born, and have been long, long in the clay of that hillside graveyard with all their neighbours and all their dead. But the house was real, and the life in it was real, every fire and tale and prayer of it true to how thousands such lived, and you have been inside it now, and that is yours to keep. And now turn away, and come back down the dark boreen between the stone walls, the way we came, and as you walk let the years begin to fold gently back the way they opened. Let the cottage grow small behind you and then be lost in the dark. Let the stone walls and the bog and the low hills thin and fade. Let the great blaze of stars overhead dim down, light by light, to the few you know from your own window. Let the streaming Atlantic wind soften and warm and become the still air of the room you are lying in. Let the 200 years come back across you, decade by decade, quiet as a tide coming in, until you are here again, now, in your own time, in your own bed, in the hush of your own night, with the cottage and its fire and its sleeping family 2 centuries behind you, and yet somehow still warm at your back, the way a fire you have sat at stays warm in you long after you have left the room. There is nothing now that you need to do. That is the first gift this evening has to give you, and I want you to take it fully. You do not need to keep hold of any of it, the names of the festivals, the way the turf was cut, the order of the prayers. Let all of that go. Let it sink down out of the front of your mind, the way the details of a place you have visited sink down and become simply a warmth you carry. Keep only, if you keep anything, the one image at the heart of it, the image the boy fell asleep with up in the loft tonight, the little red coal kept faithful under the grey ash, never dying, found again each morning, the fire that is the life of the house, and is never, ever let go out. Hold that, and let it be, for tonight the shape of your own rest, that something quiet and warm and essential in you is being kept safe under the ash through the dark hours, asking nothing of you, needing no tending from you tonight, only to be let alone to glow low and patient until the morning. You do not have to keep your own fire awake tonight. You are allowed to let the ash settle over it. It will be there in the morning. It always is. So, let yourself down now, the last little way, into the rest you have earned, the way the family let themselves down into the straw, without ceremony, without a single thing left to be done. Feel the bed under you take your weight entirely, the way the earth floor took theirs. Let the night of your room be the warm shut dark of the barred house, the night safely on the outside of the walls, nothing of it able to reach you. Let your breath go slow and easy and deep, the breath of the sleeping house, the man and the woman and the old grandmother and the children and the cow all breathing together in the dark, and let yourself breathe with them and be one more sleeper, under one more roof on that wide sleeping land. There is the wind, far off now, going over the thatch. There is the fire, banked and safe. There are your own people, whoever and wherever they are, near you in the dark as that family was near each other. And there is the long turning of the night, carrying you gently toward a morning that is sure to come, that will find its own fire glowing under its own ash, that asks nothing of you now, but that you let it come in its own time while you rest. Drift now, let the room go, let the last red glow of the hearth dim down behind your eyes. The tale is told, the fire is raked, the door is barred, the prayers are said, and there is nothing left in all the warm world but the breathing and the wind and the deep-kept rest, and you are held in the middle of it, safe as the seed of fire under the ash, and you may let go and sink and sleep. Before you go all the way under, let me leave one quiet word with you, and then I will let you be. If the few hours we have spent together inside that vanished house gave you some ease tonight, some rest you were needing, then I am glad of it, and there is more where this came from. Evenings like this one, waiting to be sat through whenever you have need of them. And if you would like them to find their own way to you, you are welcome to subscribe, with no hurry about it and nothing owed. Everything you heard tonight was drawn with care from how these people truly lived. The fire and the half-door and the rambling and the kept flame all real, gathered and pieced together so that you could step inside a life long gone and rest there a while. And if telling me, whenever you wake, where you were listening from and how you slept is something you feel moved to do, I always like to know. That is all of it. No more now. Sleep well, stay warm, be kind to the people in your house, and I will see you in the next one. Good night.